The year was 1877. The sun-baked earth of the Texas plains breathed out a fine red dust that coated everything. It coated the rough pine stockade of Fort Redemption. It settled on the canvas tops of the supply wagons. It filmed the surface of the water in the horse troughs. And it found its way into the lungs and onto the souls of the people who lived there. Fort Redemption was a lonely place, an outpost of progress, or so its commanders claimed. It sat alone in a vast sea of rolling grassland and sharp stone mesas. The nearest true town was more than 100 miles south. The railroad, that great iron artery of the East, had pushed its way west, a raw scar on the land. But it had stopped a good 30 or 40 miles shy of the fort. For now, the fort was an island, connected to the world only by horse and telegraph wire. The air here was thick, not just with dust, but with tension. The long, bloody wars with the native tribes were said to be cooling. The government in the East was pushing for treaties, for reservations, for a final settlement to the Indian problem. But greed was a more powerful force than peace. Greed for the land the tribes lived on. Greed for the gold rumored to be in the hills. Greed for the clear path the railroad barons wanted. So Fort Redemption was a pot simmering on a low fire, ready to boil over. Inside its walls, and in the small, filthy settlement called Redemption Town that clung to its shadow, every kind of person mixed. Blue-coated soldiers, their faces burned from the sun, drank and gambled with hard-eyed miners. Pale-faced settlers, their dreams worn thin as their clothes, bartered for supplies. Saloon girls with names invented for the West laughed too loudly in the longhorn sows. And sometimes, silent and watchful, men from the tribes, Comanche and Kiowa, would come in to trade hides, their presence a quiet challenge to the soldiers who claimed this land. It was a place of chaos, of violence, and of desperate, grasping opportunity. Into this place had come Elena Whitfield. 2 months past, she was 21 years old, the daughter of a poor, stern pastor from Boston. She had come west not for gold or for land, but to be a teacher. She taught reading, writing, and arithmetic to the children of the officers and the merchants in a small, one-room schoolhouse that smelled of new pine and chalk dust. She was, by the standards of the fort, a lady of the highest quality. She was also, in the whispers of the soldiers and the saloon girls, the virgin bride. This was a cruel joke, but one with a seed of truth. Elena was promised to be married to Lieutenant Charles Avery, a young officer she had known back home. He was a man of good standing and proper manners, but their engagement had been postponed indefinitely. The continued unrest on the frontier, he had written in his last brief letter, made it imprudent for him to take a wife. So Elena was trapped. She was bound by a promise to a man who was not here, a man whose letters had grown colder with every mile she traveled west. She was neither a wife nor a maid, but something uncomfortably in between. Her soul struggled with itself daily. She held fast to her faith, to the moral lessons her father had beaten into her. She believed in God, in sin, and in the civilized order of things. But the West shocked her, the casual roughness of the men, the open violence, the sheer, crushing scale of the land. It all terrified her. The women in the saloon wore dresses that showed their ankles, and sometimes more. The men shot each other over card games. The world she knew, of quiet parlors and polite hymns, was a fragile dream here. A part of her, a secret part she barely acknowledged, felt a strange pull, a wild, unformed longing for the very freedom that frightened her. But she pushed it down, beneath her corset and her high-necked blouses, and continued to be the good lady everyone expected her to be. Then, one hot afternoon, he arrived. His name was Grey Wolf. He was a Comanche. He did not ride into the fort as a free man. He came as part of a prisoner exchange, a token of good faith from his people, who were negotiating a truce. He rode at the head of a small delegation, his hands not bound, but his freedom clearly a matter of the fort commander's permission. He was unlike any man Elena had ever seen. He was tall on his horse, his body lean and powerful beneath worn buckskins. He wore no paint, but his long black hair was braided with strips of fur. His face was a map of hard living, sharp and clear. A long, pale scar ran from his left temple down to his jaw, a testament to a fight he had survived, if not won. He sat on his horse with an unnatural stillness, his back straight, as if he were a part of the stone mesas himself. But it was his eyes that held her. They were dark, and as he scanned the fort, they seemed to absorb everything and reflect nothing. They were cold, yes, but beneath the cold, Elena saw something else, a deep, hollowed-out sadness, a stillness that was not peace, but exhaustion. Grey Wolf was a man well known to the soldiers, and well hated. He was a warrior of great reputation. He was also a man hollowed out by loss. His wife and his young son, a boy of 5 years, had been killed 3 summers ago, not in a battle, but in a punitive raid on his sleeping village by blue-coated soldiers. Since that day, he had lived as a ghost, a lonely warrior. He fought when he had to, but the fire in him had burned down to cold embers. He was a man filled with a quiet rage, but he was, more than anything, tired of the killing, tired of the hate, tired of the war that had taken everything from him. Watching the Comanche delegation ride in was Colonel Nathan Beaumont, the man in command of Fort Redemption. Beaumont was in his late 40s, a handsome man who kept his uniform impeccably pressed, even in the dust. His boots were polished to a mirror's shine, and his graying hair was perfectly combed. He stepped forward to greet the delegation, his voice smooth and welcoming, the accent of a good Eastern education clear in his words. He was especially gracious to Elena when she happened to be passing. He would bow, inquire after her health, and speak to her as if they were in a Boston drawing room. He praised her civilizing influence on the rough children of the fort, but beneath the polish, Nathan Beaumont was a man made of cold iron and ambition. He saw the West not as a home, but as a stepping stone. He wanted a promotion. He wanted a general's star, and the fastest way to that star was to solve the Indian problem. He saw the Comanche, not as people, but as obstacles. Obstacles to the railroad, obstacles to the settlers, and obstacles to his career. He was more than willing to break any treaty, to bend any rule. If it gave him the just cause, he needed to wipe them out for good. If Beaumont was the polished face of ambition, Sam Kincaid was its dirty, calloused hand. Kincaid was often at the fort, though he wore no uniform. He was a large man with a thick beard, a former Confederate officer who had not found peace at Appomattox. He now worked as a bounty hunter, a scout, and a hired gun. He was, in truth, Beaumont's secret weapon. Kincaid and his band of hard men would ride out, burn a settler's cabin or steal a rancher's cattle, and leave behind a few clues, an arrow or a painted feather, to point the finger at the Comanche. He was paid in secret by Beaumont to create the shocking events and unprovoked attacks that Beaumont could then report to his superiors, building his case for a full-scale war. The reason for Beaumont's current good mood, and the reason for Grey Wolf's presence, was the rumor of a great peace treaty. Word had come from Washington. The government was tired of the endless, expensive wars. They wanted a final peace. The great chiefs of the Comanche were being gathered, and Fort Redemption had been chosen as the neutral ground for this historic meeting. This treaty was a disaster for Colonel Beaumont. If it was signed, the wars would end. The Comanche would be granted reservations. Their own land, the Army's role would be reduced to that of a peacekeeper, and a man could not win glory, could not earn promotion. By keeping the peace, Beaumont needed this treaty to fail. He needed a reason, a big reason, for the talks to break down, for the guns to come out one last time. A few days after Grey Wolf's arrival, Elena was walking across the parade ground. It was late afternoon, the sun a fiery ball in the dusty sky. She was on her way to the small post chapel for evening prayers. As she passed the small, windowless shed that served as the fort's jail, she heard the sound, the dull, sickening thud of a boot hitting flesh, followed by a grunt of pain. She stopped. 2 soldiers, young men she had seen at the Sunday services, were in the alley beside the jail. They had a native prisoner, an old man. Not Comanche, perhaps Kiowa. He was drunk, swaying on his feet. The soldiers were having sport with him. They shoved him, and when he fell, they kicked him. "Get up, you filthy heathen," one of them spat. "He stinks of whiskey." The other laughed and kicked the man again in the ribs. Elena felt her blood run cold. This was not a fight. This was torture. She looked around. No one else was intervening. The other soldiers in the yard looked away, pretending not to see. Then she saw him. Grey Wolf was standing not 30 feet away, by the stables. He was not a prisoner in the jail, but he was not free. He was watching. His face was like carved stone, showing no emotion. But his eyes, Elena could see his eyes, and they were filled with a profound, weary contempt. A disgust so deep it went beyond anger. He was watching the civilized men at their work. Elena did not think. She acted. Her heart was hammering in her chest. But she moved forward. "Stop," she said. Her voice was thin, a bird's cry in the wind. The soldiers turned, surprised to see her. They looked ashamed for a moment, then angry. "Ma'am, this is not your concern," the first soldier said, touching his hat, but his eyes hard. "This is army business." "He is hurt," Elena said, her voice shaking but gaining strength. You cannot do this," the old man on the ground moaned. Elena, defying all her years of proper behavior, unhooked the canteen from her own belt. She knelt in the dust, her clean dress ruined, and held the water to the old man's cracked lips. He drank greedily. When the canteen was empty, she stood up. She looked at the two soldiers, who were now shuffling their feet, looking guilty. And then she looked past them, across the yard, to the stables. Her eyes met Grey Wolf's. It was the first time they had truly looked at each other. He was not just a savage anymore, not just a prisoner. He was a man, watching her. He saw her. His expression did not change, but she felt the weight of his gaze. It was not warm. It was wary, questioning, curious. He had seen her act of defiance, her small act of kindness in a place that had none. Elena pulled her shawl tighter, her face burning. She turned and walked quickly toward the chapel, not looking back. Her hands were trembling. She had been taught her whole life that the Indian was a savage, a godless heathen. Her father had preached sermons about the Holy War to redeem them or destroy them. But she had just seen two of her own civilized men, Christian men, kicking a helpless old man for sport. And she had seen the man they called a savage. Grey Wolf, watch with eyes that held not bloodlust, but a deep, mournful dignity. A terrible, confusing question began to form in her mind. Who, truly, was the savage in this sun-baked, God-forsaken land? She was terrified of the Comanche warrior, of his scars and his coldness. But as she hurried to the church, a different, more unsettling feeling was mixing with the fear. She was drawn to him, not to the man himself, but to the wild, unbroken honesty she saw in his eyes, an honesty that her own world, with its polite lies and its hidden cruelties, seemed to have lost entirely. Colonel Nathan Beaumont stood at the window of his office, his back to the room. He watched the small, distant campfires of the Comanche delegation. They were burning just outside the fort's prescribed perimeter, a few hundred yards too close for his comfort. He despised their presence. This entire treaty negotiation felt like a surrender, a weakening of the resolve that had built the West. More than that, it was a professional dead end. Peace did not earn a man's promotions. They seemed comfortable. A low voice rumbled from the chair behind him. Sam Kincaid was tilted back, his boots propped up on Beaumont's desk, cleaning his fingernails with the tip of a long, stained Bowie knife. Beaumont did not turn. They are arrogant. This peace plan from Washington is a joke. It gives them land. It gives them rights. It treats them as equals. He drew on his cigar, the tip glowing red in the dusk. We are not equals. Peace is hard on a man's wages. Kincaid agreed, snapping the knife blade with his thumb. Mine and yours. We need this to fail. Sam, Beaumont said, turning at last. His face was calm, patrician. We need a reason. An undeniable, public and filthy reason that those sentimental fools back east cannot ignore. We need the Comanche to show their true colors. Kincaid slowly lowered his boots to the floor. Another cattle raid. Burn a homestead. It is not enough. They deny it. We deny it. It is just smoke. Beaumont leaned forward, placing his hands on his desk. We need to test them. We need to test him, the warrior, Grey Wolf. Kincaid's eyebrows lifted. He is the one who lost his family. He is the one they respect. He is the one our own men fear. If he breaks, the entire treaty breaks. Beaumont walked to a small cabinet and poured 2 glasses of whiskey. He slid one across the desk to Kincaid. We need to prove that beneath that stoic silence, he is still a savage, a beast. And how do you plan to do that? Beaumont took a small sip. By offering him the one thing a beast cannot refuse. We will give him a pure, white woman. Kincaid choked on his whiskey, his eyes watering. Colonel, you are not serious. You cannot just hand over one of our women. The men would not stand for it. I am not talking about a saloon girl. Sam, I am talking about a symbol. We will send a lamb into the wolf's den. We will set the stage for a tragedy. And when he acts upon his nature, when he defiles her, we will have our war. We will have a holy crusade. A lamb, Kincaid said, a slow, ugly grin spreading across his face. Do you have a specific lamb in mind? Beaumont smiled, a thin, cold expression that did not reach his eyes. The teacher, Miss Whitfield. The post-chaplain, Reverend Arthur Hobbs, was a man who believed deeply in a chain of command. He believed in God, and right below God, he believed in the United States Army, personified by Colonel Beaumont. When the colonel summoned him the next morning and explained the plan, the Reverend was, for a moment, horrified. But Beaumont spoke of duty, of Christian sacrifice, of the greater good. By the end of the meeting, the Reverend Hobbs was convinced it was a divine mission. It was the Reverend who escorted Elena to the colonel's office. His presence meant to soothe her. Elena, however, felt a deep, cold knot of dread. The office was suffocating, the air thick with yesterday's cigar smoke. Miss Whitfield, Colonel Beaumont said, rising to his feet with a warm, paternal smile. He was not wearing his full uniform, but a simpler officer's coat, meant to put her at ease. Please sit. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Elena sat on the edge of a hard wooden chair. Sir, the Reverend said it was a matter of great urgency. It is, Beaumont said, his face becoming a mask of solemn duty. It is a matter of peace, or of war, of life, or of death for hundreds. He steepled his fingers. As you know, we are on the cusp of a historic treaty with the Comanche, but trust, child, is a fragile thing. We must show them a gesture of absolute faith. A gesture? Sir, Reverend Hobbs leaned forward, his watery eyes pleading. My child, the Colonel, has conceived of a truly profound act of Christian faith. We must show these men that we do not fear them, that we believe in their capacity for honor. Elena looked from the Reverend to the Colonel. I do not understand. What are you asking of me? Beaumont took a breath. We are asking you to be our dove, Miss Whitfield, our olive branch. We have proposed a temporary, symbolic marriage, a bride of peace. We are asking you to go and live in the Comanche camp, as a guest, under the protection of their chief negotiator, Grey Wolf. The room went silent. Elena could hear the buzzing of a fly against the window pane. Live with him, she whispered. In his lodge. For a short time, the Reverend interjected quickly. Perhaps 1 month, only as a symbol, a test of their honor. You see, to prove they can be trusted with something precious. You will be protected. It is not a true marriage. Of course not. It is an experiment in faith. But he is, she swallowed, the word tasting like bile. A savage? Is he? Beaumont asked softly. Or is he a man, waiting for the light? This, Miss Whitfield, is your chance to be a true missionary, not to preach, but to be the sermon, to bring the very light of civilization into their midst. Elena's mind was spinning. It was madness. It was grotesque. But the two most powerful men in her world were looking at her as if she were the key to everything. They were painting her refusal not as common sense, but as a failure of courage, a failure of faith. And then, a small, bitter seed of a thought entered her mind. Her fiancé, Charles Avery. His letters were few, and when they came, they were cold, full of duty and career, with no warmth for her. He had left her here, a woman promised but unclaimed, a virgin bride in name, a subject of quiet pity and crude jokes among the soldiers. Who was she? Really a faded flower, waiting for a man who did not seem to want her? "What if I refuse?" she asked, her voice small. Beaumont's smile faded. "Just for a second." "Of course. It is your choice, child. We cannot force you. But if your courage fails, then I fear this peace will fail. The Comanche will see your refusal as proof of our distrust. They will walk away, and the war will begin again. The blood that is shed will be on our hands." He was blaming her. He was placing the weight of the entire frontier on her small shoulders. "I must have time to pray," she said, rising on trembling legs. She did not need to wait long to feel the pressure. Word spread through the fort like a grass fire. By noon, everyone knew. The virgin teacher was being sent to the savage. The whispers followed her as she walked from the schoolhouse. In the Longhorn Sal's, soldiers were already laying bets. $10 says he has her before the week is out. She will come back with a half-breed in her belly. "It is a test, you fools. They are testing if the animal can control himself." Elena locked herself in her small room, her face burning with humiliation. She was no longer a person. She was a test, a piece of bait, a sacrifice. The public negotiation was held 3 days later. On the dusty parade ground under a merciless, white-hot sun, the Comanche delegation sat on blankets on one side, led by their old, stern chief, 10 Bears. Colonel Beaumont and his officers, in their best blue uniforms, sat on chairs on the other. Elena was seated next to Reverend Hobbs, her face hidden by her bonnet. Her hands clenched so tightly in her lap her knuckles were white, after the long ritual speeches about peace and brotherhood. Colonel Beaumont stood. His voice was full of false sincerity. "To prove that our words are not just wind, to bind our two peoples together in a way no paper treaty can, we offer a living symbol of our trust. A bride of peace, our own Miss Whitfield, a woman of God, has volunteered to live among you as a guest in the lodge of your great warrior, Grey Wolf, for a period of 1 month. She will be a symbol of our faith in your honor." A profound, shocked silence fell over the parade ground. The soldiers stared. The Comanche warriors stirred, their faces hardening into masks of disbelief and anger. Grey Wolf, who had been standing motionless, silent, behind his chief, did not move. But Elena saw his hands, at his sides, slowly clench into fists. He knew. In that instant, she knew that he knew. He knew this was a trap, a white man's game of humiliation. 10 Bears spoke in his own tongue, the words short and harsh. The translator, a nervous half-breed named Jesse, relayed his words. "The chief asks why you send a woman. A woman is not a sign of peace. She is a prize of war. If you want to show trust, send a soldier. Send your son." Beaumont smiled, undeterred. "Because a soldier is a symbol of death, Chief. A woman is a symbol of life, of home, of the future. We offer you our future." All eyes, Comanche and white, turned to Grey Wolf. He stepped forward, his moccasins making no sound in the dust. He did not look at Beaumont. He looked at Elena. He stared at her for a long, unbearable moment. His dark eyes scanned her, not with the lust she had seen from the soldiers, but with a cold, intense, assessing gaze. He saw her terror. She was trembling like a captured rabbit, but he also saw, just as he had seen by the jail, that she was not looking at him with hatred or disgust. She was simply, profoundly, afraid, and she was decent. He knew the game. If he refused, the white colonel would claim the Comanche were dishonorable, that they admitted their own bestial nature by being afraid to take the test. The talks would end. If he accepted, his stomach tightened. He would be forced to guard a woman who was a living symbol of the people who had murdered his wife, murdered his son. She would be a white, fragile reminder of his pain. Sleeping in his lodge, he would play their game, and he would win it. He would accept their bait, and he would return it to them, untouched, and prove that their honor was the lie. He spoke, his voice low and rough, his English clipped but clear. "Is this your plan for peace? This is our hope," Beaumont said, his voice dripping with goodwill. Grey Wolf held Elena's gaze. He gave a single, sharp nod. "We accept this symbol." Later that night, Grey Wolf spoke to his chief in their lodge. "It is a trap. My uncle, they want me to fail. They want a reason to start the war." "I know," Ten Bears said, his old eyes sad. "But to refuse is to give them a different reason. You must be stronger than their treachery. Protect the girl. Return her to them as she was given. Show them that a Comanche warrior's honor is not so easily broken." Elena, too, was facing her own reckoning. Reverend Hobbs came to her room, pressing her for her final answer. She felt the walls closing in, the leering stares of the soldiers, the cold silence of her fiancé, the crushing weight of Beaumont's holy mission. If she was to be a pawn, she would, for once, choose the move herself. "I will go," she said, her voice shaking but firm. She met the Reverend's gaze. "I will be their bride of peace. But I go as a Christian woman. No man, white or Comanche, will force me to act against God's will or my own conscience. That is my only condition." Colonel Beaumont was publicly overjoyed. He clasped his hands and praised her saintly courage, her heroic sacrifice for peace. His eyes, however, were cold and calculating. He was already imagining the wording of his report back east, the report of how the brave virgin teacher had been defiled by the savage, sparking a righteous war. The giving was held the next day at sunset, a grotesque parody of a wedding. The entire fort was gathered. Soldiers lined the walls, catcalling and whistling. Elena was dressed in a simple white day dress. Her best. She wore a light veil, not as a bride, she told herself, but to shield her face from the dust and the leers. Reverend Hobbs, looking pale and sick, led her by the arm to the main gate. Grey Wolf was waiting. He was not on foot. He was mounted on a tall war pony, and he held the reins of a second, smaller horse. He wore simple buckskins, and his face was impassive, like a mask carved from red stone. "We entrust her to your care," the Reverend said, his voice cracking. "In the spirit of peace, give him a kiss. Teacher," a soldier yelled from the wall, followed by a wave of crude laughter. "Show him what a white woman is like. Missy." Elena's face burned with shame so hot it brought tears to her eyes. She wanted to run. Grey Wolf ignored them all. He looked down at Elena. He did not get off his horse. He did not offer her a hand. He simply nodded at the second horse. He expected her to mount it herself. For a moment, she faltered. Then, gathering all her dignity, she bundled her skirts, put her foot in the stirrup, and awkwardly pulled herself into the saddle. Grey Wolf nodded once, a small sign of approval. He turned his horse to lead the way out of the gate. As he passed her, he spoke, his voice so low that only she could hear it, a deep rumble that vibrated through her. "I will not do what you do not want," he said. "But now I must protect you from your own people." Before she could even understand what he meant, it happened. 3 soldiers, their faces flushed with whiskey from the saloon, stumbled forward, blocking the gate. They were laughing. "Hold on, savage," one of them shouted, grabbing the bridle of Grey Wolf's horse. "You cannot just take her." "That is right," another one slurred. "We got a right to a goodbye kiss from our teacher." The third soldier, a burly corporal with a red, sweating face, reached directly for Elena. "Let us see the pretty bride," he roared, and grabbed her veil, yanking it hard. The cloth ripped from her bonnet. Elena cried out, a sharp, terrified sound. It happened faster than a blink. Grey Wolf was off his horse. He was not a guest. He was not a symbol. He was a storm. He hit the first soldier, the one holding his bridle, with a closed fist. A single, brutal blow to the jaw that sent the man crashing to the ground, unconscious. The second soldier lunged, his fists raised. Grey Wolf moved inside the clumsy punch, striking the man twice, hard, in the stomach. The soldier crumpled, gasping and vomiting whiskey into the dust. The third soldier, the corporal who had ripped her veil, stared in drunken shock, his hand still holding the torn fabric. Grey Wolf grabbed the man's wrist. He twisted. There was a wet, sickening snap. The man screamed, a high, piercing sound, and dropped to his knees, cradling his broken arm. The entire fort went silent. The catcalls died. The laughter choked. Grey Wolf stood over the three groaning men, his chest heaving. He had not drawn his knife. He had not drawn a gun. He had not needed to. He looked up, his eyes blazing, and scanned the stunned faces of the soldiers on the walls. It was a clear, cold warning. He bent, retrieved the torn piece of her veil from the dust, and calmly walked back to his horse. He mounted up in one fluid motion. Elena was frozen, her hand to her mouth, shaking so violently she could barely hold the reins. She looked at the blue-coated soldiers, her protectors, her people. They had watched. They had done this. She looked at Grey Wolf. The savage, the heathen. He was bleeding from a cut on his knuckles. He had just, without hesitation, broken a man's arm to protect her veil. To protect her, he looked at her, his dark eyes holding no triumph, only that same deep, weary exhaustion. He nodded his head toward the open gate. Without another word, Elena Whitfield gathered her reins, kicked her horse, and rode out of Fort Redemption, following the Comanche warrior into the vast, unknown, and terrifying wilderness. They rode for 2 hours, leaving the ugly scar of Fort Redemption behind them, swallowed by the dust. Elena's back ached, and her hands, gloved and sweating, were sore from gripping the reins. The official procession was a strange and tense affair. At the lead rode a young, nervous lieutenant named Harris, along with a dozen cavalry troopers. Their blue uniforms were already dark with sweat, their carbines unslung and resting on their thighs. They were the honor guard, meant to protect the bride of peace. Behind them, in a tight group, rode Grey Wolf and 5 of his Comanche warriors. They moved with a fluid grace that made the soldiers look stiff and clumsy. They carried bows and rifles, their faces as hard and unreadable as the landscape. Elena rode between the soldiers and the Comanche, a strange, isolated figure in the middle. She was the symbol no one wanted, and far behind them, a mile or 2 back, just at the edge of the dust cloud, was another group. This one did not ride in formation. They were shadows, moving from ridge to ridge, careful to stay unseen. Sam Kincaid led them. He was not wearing a Confederate uniform now, but a mix of buckskin and dirty wool. His face was painted in a crude mockery of war paint. His men were similarly disguised, a collection of the hardest, cruelest cutthroats the frontier had to offer. Kincaid had his orders from Beaumont. The escort was just a performance. The real show was about to begin. The official purpose, as written on Lieutenant Harris's orders, was to escort Miss Elena Whitfield to the Comanche winter camp, as a gesture of goodwill to cement the forthcoming treaty negotiations. The unwritten purpose, as Elena felt it in her bones, was to deliver a lamb to the slaughter. This was the first time Elena had truly been in the West. She had traveled it, but from the dirty window of a train car or the bouncing seat of a stagecoach. Now, she was a part of it. The sky was not just blue, it was a vast, crushing, infinite bowl of bright, hot blue that pressed down on her. The land was not empty. It was alive. She saw great, jagged mesas of red rock that looked like the ruins of ancient, giant cities. The prairie grass rolled in waves, like a green ocean, stretching farther than her mind could comprehend. In the distance, a dark, moving cloud resolved itself into a herd of buffalo, thousands of them, their grunts carrying on the wind. She glanced at Grey Wolf, who rode a few yards to her left. He was watching the buffalo herd, his head tilted. He was not admiring the view. He was reading it, like a page in a book she could not understand. He saw the way the herd moved, saw the dust on the horizon, smelled the air. She realized, with a sudden, sinking feeling, that the maps in her schoolhouse were lies. They showed empty spaces, with names like Indian Territory written over them. But this was not an empty space. This was a home. This was his home. And she, and the soldiers, and the railroad, were the invaders. The weather changed in an instant, with a violence she had only read about. The bright blue sky vanished. A low, gray-yellow wall of cloud appeared on the horizon, moving toward them with impossible speed. The wind stopped. The air became thick, still, and charged with electricity. "Dust storm!" Lieutenant Harris shouted, his voice high and panicked. "Make a line! Make a line! Men hold the horses!" The soldiers began to curse and wrestle with their spooked mounts. They pulled kerchiefs over their faces, but they were too late. The wind hit them like a physical blow. A solid, screaming wall of sand and grit. It was instant chaos. Elena cried out as her horse reared, blinded and terrified. She pulled back on the reins, but the animal was beyond her control. She was thrown from the saddle, landing hard in the dirt. The breath knocked from her lungs. The air was dark, a howling, stinging twilight. She could not breathe. She could not see. She was going to be trampled. A hand grabbed her, hard. It was not gentle. It was iron. Grey Wolf was beside her, though she had not seen him move. He had his own horse and hers by the reins in one hand, and with the other, he hauled her to her feet. "Cover your mouth!" he shouted over the roar of the wind. He didn't wait for her to obey. He pulled the tattered remains of her veil from her bonnet and tied it, roughly, around her face, covering her nose and mouth. "Turn your back to the wind!" he yelled. He pushed her against the side of his horse, then stepped in front of her, using his own body as a shield. He put his arm across her, pinning her between himself and the warm, solid flank of the animal. Elena was pressed against him, her face buried in his leather shirt. It smelled of smoke and horse and the clean, wild scent of the wind itself. She could feel the solid, steady beat of his heart against her cheek. He was completely calm. He stood like a rock, his head bowed, his body taking the full force of the stinging, biting sand. Around them, the soldiers were a mess. Horses were running loose. Men were shouting, lost from each other, their commands swallowed by the storm. But the Comanche warriors had formed a tight, silent circle, their horses facing inward, their heads bowed, waiting. They did not fight the storm. They endured it. Elena stood there, sheltered by the man she had been taught to fear as a monster. He was protecting her from the land itself, a land he understood, and he was doing it with an instinctive, immediate authority. It was the first act of true care she had received since coming west, and it was not sexual, not even personal. It was the simple, practical act of a man who knew how to survive, protecting someone who did not. The storm lasted for perhaps 20 minutes, and then, as quickly as it came, it was gone, leaving behind a clear, washed sky and a world coated in brown. They made camp that night by a small, muddy creek. The soldiers were weary and irritable. They had lost 2 pack horses in the storm. The Comanches set their own small camp 100 yards away, a move that made Lieutenant Harris visibly nervous. "Miss Whitfield, you will camp with us." "Of course," he said, trying to be commanding. "She camps where I camp," Grey Wolf's voice cut in. He had walked up, silent as a shadow. "She is my charge." "Sir, that is highly improper." "It is more improper," Grey Wolf said, his eyes on the nervous soldiers. "To leave her where she is not safe." The implication was clear, and after the incident at the gate, Harris could not argue. A small, separate tent was pitched for Elena, halfway between the 2 camps, after a miserable meal of hardtack and cold bacon. Elena sat by her small, lonely fire. She was exhausted, bruised from her fall, and her spirit was at its lowest ebb. She felt like a bone fought over by 2 dogs. He appeared at the edge of her firelight. He did not ask to sit. He simply squatted on his heels, a few feet away, staring into the flames. They sat in silence for a long time. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the distant, nervous stamps of the cavalry horses. "Why did you do that?" she finally asked, her voice quiet. "At the fort. Why did you help me?" He looked at her. His face was softer in the firelight. The scar seemed less angry. "They were drunk. They have no honor," he said, his English slow, each word chosen with care. "They shamed you. They shamed themselves." "They are my people," she said, though the words tasted like ash. "Yes." He looked back at the fire. "Your people." "And your people," she began, then faltered. "The soldiers say they say." "We are Comanche," he said. He picked up a stick and drew a shape in the dirt. "We fight. We must. This is our land. Your people come, and they draw lines on paper and say the land is theirs. We do not understand these lines." He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "I had a son. He was 5 years old. He did not understand the lines, either. The soldiers came. Now, he is gone. My wife is gone. They did not fight. They were sleeping." Elena felt tears sting her eyes, not for herself, but for the raw, simple pain in his voice. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I did not know. It is the way of this war," he said, his voice flat, all emotion gone again. She felt a strange need to share her own, much smaller pain. "I am also promised to a soldier, a lieutenant, back east. I thought he was a good man, but he is not here. He left me here." She looked down at her hands. "I think it is just a duty he has, not a person he loves." Grey Wolf looked at her, a long, considering look. "We are both," he said slowly. "In prisons we did not build. In that moment, by a small fire, surrounded by enemies. They were not a white lady and a savage warrior. They were just two people, trapped by decisions made by powerful, distant men. They were not friends, but, for a few minutes, they were not enemies either." Sam Kincaid, from a dark ridge a mile away, was watching the 3 campfires through a spyglass. He saw the main soldier camp, he saw the smaller Comanche camp, and he saw the single, isolated fire in the middle. "Perfect," he whispered to his men, who were checking their weapons in the dark. "They split up for us. That is the girl's fire, right there in the middle. She is the target." His plan was simple. His disguised men would attack the soldiers' camp first, creating chaos and noise. In the confusion, a second team would rush the girl's tent, grab her, and be gone before anyone knew what happened. He would leave a few Comanche lances and a dropped moccasin, just for effect. Beaumont would have his unprovoked attack and his abducted white woman by morning. "Wait until they send out the pickets," Kincaid ordered. "Wait until the camp is quiet. We hit them when they are dreaming." An hour later, Elena was in her tent, lying on her bedroll, still in her dusty dress, too afraid and too miserable to sleep. The night exploded. It was not a single gunshot. It was a volley, a crash of rifles from the darkness, followed by the high, terrifying screams of men hid in their sleep. Indians. A soldier shrieked from the cavalry camp. "We are under attack!" More shots. Horses screamed. Elena scrambled to the opening of her tent, her heart trying to beat its way out of her chest. In the chaotic moonlight, she saw them. Warriors, on foot, their faces painted, rushing the soldiers' camp. They were screaming a high, ululating war cry. Before she could even move, her tent flap was ripped open, but it was not an attacker. It was Grey Wolf. His face was a mask of cold fury. He was not in a panic. He was angry. "It is a lie," he hissed, grabbing her arm. "This is not our way. The cries are wrong. They fight like white men." He did not give her time to think. He dragged her from the tent, shoving her hard into a shallow, dry ditch a few yards away. "Stay down. Do not move," he commanded. He pushed her head down into the dirt, and for one terrible second, she thought he was going to kill her. Instead, he covered her body with his own, a living shield, as a fresh volley of bullets ripped through the air above them. "Stay," he ordered. Then, he was gone. He did not run to his own men. He ran toward the fight. Elena, her face pressed into the dirt, shaking, dared to look up. The scene was pure, Hellish chaos. The soldiers were firing blindly, their camp in disarray. The warriors were among them, fighting with knives and hatchets. And then she saw Grey Wolf. He was not fighting with the attackers. He was fighting against them. She saw a young soldier, a boy she had seen in her class, with his rifle jammed, about to be knifed by one of the painted men. Grey Wolf tackled the attacker from the side. He did not kill him. He disarmed him, smashing the man's head against a wagon wheel, and then grabbed the soldier's rifle. "They are not Comanche," he roared, his voice cutting through the gunfire. "Fight them." He moved through the battle like a phantom. Elena saw him pull one of his own Comanche warriors, who had been wounded by the first volley, behind a barricade of supply crates. He shoved the rifle into the warrior's hands. Then he saw a new threat. 3 of the attackers were not fighting. They were running straight for her tent. They were the abduction team. Grey Wolf cut them off. He met them in the open, with no weapon but the knife in his hand. Elena watched. Her heart stopped. It was not a fight. It was a butcher. He was a different man. He was not the quiet, sad person from the campfire. He died. He moved with a speed that was not human, and in a blur of motion. All 3 men were on the ground, and Grey Wolf was standing over them, his chest heaving, his knife dripping in the moonlight. The remaining attackers, seeing their leaders fall, broke. They ran, disappearing into the darkness as suddenly as they had appeared. The fight, from start to finish, had lasted less than 5 minutes. The silence that fell was worse than the noise. It was filled with the groans of the wounded. Elena climbed slowly from the ditch, her legs numb. Her mind could not process what she had seen. The image of the savage was gone, shattered. In its place was the image of a man who had fought to protect everyone. He had saved the soldier. He had saved his own man. And he had, with terrifying, brutal violence, saved her. Grey Wolf was standing over one of the attackers he had killed. He kicked the body onto its back. Lieutenant Harris, his face pale and sick, walked over, a pistol smoking in his hand. "My God," Harris whispered. "He is white." Grey Wolf knelt and wiped the crude paint from the dead man's face. Beneath it was a pale, bearded white man, a cavalry sergeant, an old, grizzled veteran, knelt beside Grey Wolf. He pointed at the dead man's feet. "Look at this, sir." The man was wearing moccasins, but underneath, he had on standard-issue army boots. The sergeant picked up the man's rifle. "And this here is a Spencer repeater, brand new, not the old trade muskets." Grey Wolf stood up. He looked past the sergeant, past the lieutenant, and into the darkness toward Fort Redemption, dozens of miles away. His face was cold, and his eyes were filled with a terrible, certain understanding. Elena, her hands wrapped around herself, watched him. She, too, was beginning to understand. The men who had just tried to kill her, the men who had just tried to abduct her, were not Comanche. They were her own people. The lie was not in the wilderness. The lie was back at the fort. The conflict in her soul was no longer a small, quiet question. It was a roaring fire. Her loyalty to her race, her country, her civilization, was at war with the truth she had just seen with her own eyes. And she was standing on the wrong side. The journey to the main Comanche camp took 2 more days. The small cavalry escort, led by a visibly shaken Lieutenant Harris, had remained with them after the ambush, but the mood was no longer one of official duty. It was tense, filled with suspicion. Harris and his men had seen the army boots on the dead attackers. They knew a terrible lie had been told, but they were soldiers, and they did not know what to do with the truth. At the fork of the Red River, the trail split. Harris rested on his horse. "Miss Whitfield, my orders are to see you to the camp, but after last night," he looked at Grey Wolf, his expression a mix of fear and a new, grudging respect. "Colonel Beaumont must be informed of this deception. You will ride back to your fort," Grey Wolf said. It was not a request. "You will tell your colonel what you saw. Tell him his dogs are dead." "And Miss Whitfield?" Harris asked, his duty warring with his fear. "She is my charge. She is safer with us than she was with you," Grey Wolf said. Harris looked at Elena. She simply nodded, her face pale but set. She had made her choice in the night. The soldiers, her protectors, were the ones who had set the trap. The man they called Savage had been the one to spring her from it. Harris, seeing he had no authority here, gave a curt, clumsy salute, wheeled his horse, and led his men away, riding fast toward Fort Redemption, carrying a truth that he knew his commander did not want to hear. Elena was now truly alone, surrounded by 5 Comanche warriors, leagues from any white settlement. Yet, for the first time since arriving in Texas, the knot of fear in her stomach had eased. They rode into the valley of the winter camp at sunset. The place was hidden, sheltered by high red cliffs that shielded it from the wind. Elena had expected a small, dirty cluster of tents, as depicted in the lurid newspapers back in Boston. What she saw took her breath away. It was a village. Hundreds of painted teepees, tall and graceful, were arranged in a great circle. Thousands of horses, a living, moving sea of brown and black and white, grazed on the rich valley grass. The air did not smell of filth. It smelled of clean wood smoke, of roasting meat, of sage. Dogs barked. Children, naked and laughing, chased each other through the camp. Women, in beautifully decorated leather dresses, worked hides, their voices rising and falling in conversation. It was not a camp. It was a home. It was organized. It was busy. It was alive. Their arrival stopped everything. The laughter of the children died, the women's hands still. Everyone turned to watch as their warriors returned, bringing a white woman, dressed in a torn and filthy white woman's dress, into their circle. Gray Wolf ignored the stares. He rode through the center of the camp, his back straight, Elena following close behind. He led her to a large, well-kept teepee near the center. An old woman, her face a beautiful, intricate map of wrinkles, stood waiting. She was straight as an arrow. Her black hair, though threaded with gray, was thick and long. Her eyes were as dark and sharp as Gray Wolf's. He dismounted and spoke to her in the low, flowing Comanche tongue. The old woman, Stone Woman, his mother's sister, looked at Elena. It was not a welcoming gaze. It was a cold, thorough inspection, the kind one gives to a horse, checking its teeth and its legs for any weakness. Elena, her skin prickling, felt the weight of hundreds of eyes. The women murmured, their voices low, their expressions hard. She was an alien, a curiosity, a threat. She was the enemy, delivered to their doorstep. A young warrior, tall and muscular, his face arrogant and handsome, strode forward. He carried a new repeating rifle, a sign of his status. This was Black Coyote. He spoke loudly, his voice full of contempt, and jabbed a finger toward Elena. He was not speaking to her, but to Gray Wolf, challenging him before the entire camp. Elena did not need to understand the words. The sneer was universal. Gray Wolf turned, his hand falling to the knife at his hip. His reply was low, a dangerous rumble, like stones shifting. Black Coyote's face darkened. He spat on the ground, the dust landing near Elena's feet, in a movement so fast it was almost invisible. Gray Wolf crossed the space between them. He did not draw his knife, but his hand was on the hilt, and his face was a mask of cold death. The entire camp tensed, a collective intake of breath, before blood could be spilled. Stone Woman barked a single, sharp command. The word was like a whip. The 2 warriors froze. Black Coyote held Gray Wolf's murderous gaze for a second longer. Then, with a final, contemptuous sniff, he turned and stalked away. But his eyes, as he left, promised that this was not over. Gray Wolf slowly let his hand fall from his knife. He turned to Elena, his composure restored. "He called you a white snake," Gray Wolf said, his voice flat. "He said I brought poison into our home." He lifted the flap of the teepee and motioned for her to enter. Elena hesitated, then ducked inside. The interior was surprisingly large and clean. A small, smokeless fire burned in a clay pit in the center. On one side of the fire, a large, thick pile of buffalo robes was laid out. His bed, on the opposite side. A smaller, thinner pallet of furs had been placed. Her bed? This was it, the moment she had dreaded. She was alone with him, in his lodge, his bride. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs. Grey Wolf entered after her, letting the flap fall, plunging the teepee into a dim, smoky twilight. He did not approach her. He stood by the entrance, his broad shoulders blocking the light. "This," he said, his voice rough, "is the marriage your colonel wanted?" He pointed to the pallet. "You will sleep there." Elena swallowed, her throat dry. "Sleep here with you?" "Yes." He finally turned to look at her, his face rigid in the firelight. "Your colonel sends you as a test. My people they watch. Black Coyote watches. If you sleep in another lodge, they say I reject the peace. They say—" He paused, searching for the English words. "They say I find you ugly, and this is an insult. Or, they say you are a woman of no honor, passed to other men. It is a trap, for you, and for me." He gestured to her pallet. "That is your place." Then he pointed to his own, on the other side of the fire. "This is my place. I will not cross the fire." Elena stared at him, uncomprehending. He was setting a boundary, a safe boundary. You will not," she whispered, unable to say the word that had haunted her for days. His face hardened. "I will not touch you," he said, the words sharp. "I will not claim you. This is not a marriage of the body. This is a duty. I must protect you from my people. I must protect you from your people. And I must protect my own honor from your colonel's lies." Elena sank onto the small pallet, the sudden, overwhelming wave of relief making her dizzy. She had been prepared to fight him, to die, even. She had not been prepared for this. This man, this savage, had just offered her a level of respect and consideration that no civilized man ever had. Her own fiancé, Charles, in his polite, distant letters, had always spoken of her as a possession he would one day collect. The soldiers at the fort saw her as meat. Grey Wolf, the man she was sent to test, saw her as a human being, trapped in the same snare as he was. A strange, baffling warmth spread through her chest, a feeling so foreign she could not name it. It was gratitude, but it was more than that. It was respect. The days that followed were the strangest of her life. Stone Woman took charge of her education. She was a harsh, impatient teacher. She did not coddle Elena. She woke her at dawn. She tossed Elena a pair of soft, beaded moccasins after pointing at her impractical, high-buttoned boots and laughing. She set Elena to work. Elena learned to grind corn on a flat stone, her soft Boston hands blistering and cracking. She tried to scrape a deer hide and ruined it, earning a sharp scolding from Stone Woman that needed no translation. The children of the camp, at first cautious, now found her a source of great amusement. They giggled as she fumbled with her tasks, her fine dress stained with grease and dirt. But Elena, stubborn and desperate to prove she was not the white snake Black Coyote called her, did not give up. She learned to mix the cornmeal with water and berries, patting it into small cakes to cook on a hot stone. She learned which plants to gather sage for ceremonies, and a bitter root for headaches. And she listened. In the evenings, she sat in the back of the lodge, quiet as a mouse, while Stone Woman told stories to the grandchildren. They were not the simple fables Elena had expected. They were complex, beautiful, and sometimes terrifying myths about the Creator, about the first Comanche, about the trickster, Coyote, and the great eagle. She was not just learning a list of tasks. She was witnessing a complete, rich, and ancient culture, one her own people were trying to erase from the earth. Grey Wolf was a distant presence. He left before she was awake and returned long after dark. He was hunting, or on patrol, or in council with the elders. He seemed to be avoiding the lodge. He seemed to be avoiding her, but he was watching. He was in the council lodge when Stone Woman, in her dry, crackling voice, reported on the white woman. "She is not strong," his aunt had said, "but she is not weak, either. She learns. She does not complain, and the children begin to like her. She sings them a song, a soft, strange song from her own people. He would return to his lodge and find her asleep on her pallet, her face smudged with soot, her hair coming loose from its tight bun. He would feel a strange, dangerous pull. He saw her kindness to the children. He saw her respect for his aunt. He saw the quiet, determined bravery she showed every day, just by existing in this hostile world. She was not a symbol. She was a woman. She was small and soft, and she smelled like smoke and the herb Stone Woman had gathered. He felt a hollowness inside him, an ache for the wife he had lost, for the easy, warm laughter that had once filled his teepee. This woman, this Elena, she was a flickering candle in that cold, dark space, and he stamped it out. He hated himself for it. She was a tool of his enemies. She was a trap. To feel anything for her was to betray his wife's memory. It was to be the fool Beaumont believed him to be. So he grew colder, more distant. He spoke to her only when he must, his words clipped and harsh. Then the storm came. It was not the dry dust storm of the plains. This was a true Texas thunderstorm, a violent, sudden deluge. The wind shrieked, and the rain came down in solid, driving sheets. The teepee, so sturdy and calm before, became a living, groaning thing. The taut leather snapped and cracked like gunfire. Elena, her nerves already frayed, was terrified. She had been afraid of lightning since she was a small child, after a great oak tree outside her window had been struck and split in two. She sat on her bedroll, her arms wrapped around her knees, trying to stifle her cries as the thunder cracked directly overhead, shaking the very ground. A flash of lightning lit the teepee in a brilliant, terrifying white, and she saw the terror on her own face reflected in gray-wolfed eyes. He was on his side of the fire, watching her. He saw her flinch with every flash. He saw her body shaking, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Another crash, louder this time, made her cry out, a small, choked sound. He moved. In the darkness between flashes, he crossed the small space. He sat beside her on her pallet. Elena gasped, startled. "I am sorry," she stammered. "I do not mean to be afraid of the lightning." He said nothing. He simply reached over to his own bed, took the heavy, thick buffalo robe that he slept in, and draped it around her shoulders. It was heavy, and it was warm. It smelled of him, of smoke and pine and the clean, wild scent of the plains. She pulled it around her, but she was still shaking. He hesitated. He could feel her fear, a living thing in the small, dark space. This was the line he had drawn in his own mind, the line he had sworn he would not cross. He did not embrace her. He did not touch her skin. He simply put his hand on her shoulder, over the thick fur robe. His hand was heavy, solid, and warm. His grip was firm, not romantic, but steadying. "It is only the sky," he said, his voice a low rumble, barely heard over the wind. "It will pass." Elena, shocked by the contact, slowly, tentatively, leaned into the warmth of the robe. His hand did not move. He did not speak again. He simply sat there, a silent, solid, unmoving rock in the middle of the storm, guarding her. He sat with her for an hour, maybe more, until the thunder moved away and the rain softened to a steady drumbeat, and her trembling finally stopped. 2 days later, a scout, his horse slick with sweat, rode into camp. He went straight to the council lodge. Gray Wolf was summoned. When he returned to their tepee hours later, his face was a mask of cold fury. "What is it?" Elena asked, her new, halting Comanche words failing her. "What is wrong?" "Your people," he said, his voice hard. "Your colonel. He gathers more soldiers. He says he must ensure the safety of the white bride. He says we are too dangerous. But that is not true." And more, Gray Wolf continued, ignoring her. "His scout, Kincaid, the man who wears the paint, he has attacked a miners' camp by the Silver Creek. He killed 3 men. He left our arrows, our lances. He tells the other miners the Comanche did it. Now, all the white men in the territory call for war." Before Elena could even process this new treachery, A cry went up from the edge of the camp. A small group of riders was approaching. Soldiers. It was Lieutenant Harris, returning with a delegation of 3 other officers, and a white-bearded man in a black suit. A formal council was called immediately. 10 Bears, Grey Wolf, and all the warriors gathered. Elena was brought to stand near Stone Woman. An observer, the man in the black suit, a government agent from Santa Fe, read the charge. Warriors of the Comanche Nation, you are accused of breaking the truce. You are accused of the unprovoked murder of 3 prospectors at the Miller Creek Silver Camp. Black Coyote leaped to his feet, his voice ringing with rage, denying the charge. The agent looked past him. At Elena. Miss Whitfield, Colonel Beaumont is deeply concerned for your welfare. He has sent these men to negotiate your immediate release and return to the fort. Lieutenant Harris looked miserable. This was her chance, her escape. She could walk away, ride back to the fort, back to civilization. She could leave all this death in this complex, frightening world behind her. She looked at 10 Bears, his face like ancient, wrinkled stone. She looked at Black Coyote, who was staring at her with pure hatred, daring her to speak. And she looked at Grey Wolf. He was standing near the edge of the circle, his arms crossed, his face a mask. He was waiting. Elena Whitfield, the pastor's daughter from Boston, the virgin bride, the white snake, took a step forward. Her entire body was shaking, but she held her head high. Lieutenant Harris, she said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the silence of the valley. That is a lie. A collective gasp went up, from the soldiers and the Comanche. Harris's face turned a dull, blotchy red. Miss Whitfield, you are overwrought. You do not know what you are saying. I know exactly what I am saying, Elena said, her voice gaining a strength she did not know she possessed. The attack on the silver mine is a lie. It is a lie, just like the attack on us on the trail. The government agent looked confused. What attack? The night of the dust storm. Elena's words came faster now. We were attacked. The men who attacked us were dressed as Comanche. They screamed your war cries, but they were not Comanche. She turned, her eyes finding the grizzled sergeant who had been at the battle. Sergeant, tell them. Tell them what we found. The sergeant shuffled his feet, then looked at Harris, who gave a tiny, desperate shake of his head. They were white men, Elena said, her voice ringing off the cliffs. They were white men, dressed in paint, but they were wearing United States Army boots. I saw them. He saw them. We buried them. You are lying about the silver mine because you lied about the ambush. You do not want peace. You are trying to start a kint. She had done it. She had crossed a line from which there was no return. She had, in front of the entire Comanche nation, accused the United States Army of murder and treachery. Lieutenant Harris looked like he was going to be sick. The government agent stared, his mouth open. Elena turned, her legs feeling weak, and searched for Grey Wolf. He was no longer standing at the edge of the circle. He was standing right behind her. He was looking at her, and the mask was gone. The coldness, the suspicion, the distance, it had all been burned away. In its place, she saw something that made her heart stop. It was respect, it was gratitude, and it was a fierce, blazing pride that was so intense, so possessive, it almost frightened her. He had been sent a test, a lamb to judge. He had been given a lion. The silence that followed Elena's accusation was absolute, heavier and more profound than the vast sky above them. The government agent, a man named Thorne, stared at her, his jaw slack. Lieutenant Harris looked as if he were about to be physically ill. Even 10 Bears and the Council of Warriors were still stunned by the white woman's raw courage. Grey Wolf, standing just behind her, was a pillar of stone, but his presence was an answer. He was with her, Mr. Thorne was the first to recover, smoothing his black suit jacket. Miss Whitfield, he said, his voice regaining its oily, political smoothness. You are clearly not yourself. You have been through a terrible ordeal. You are overwrought. I am overwrought because I have seen the truth, Elena countered, her voice shaking but not breaking. Sergeant, I ask you again. Tell this man what you found on the bodies. Tell him you saw the army boots." The sergeant looked at the ground, then at Lieutenant Harris, his face a miserable knot of fear and duty. "Sir, the lady, she is not wrong." Harris closed his eyes, his face ashen. The agent, Mr. Thorne, looked from the sergeant to the lieutenant, his eyes narrowing. He was a politician, and he smelled like a rat. He smelled a lie that was bigger than a simple Indian skirmish. "Lieutenant," Thorne said, his voice now cold, "our mission here was to retrieve Miss Whitfield. It seems she does not wish to be retrieved, and you have reports to file. We will return to Fort Redemption immediately." The delegation of soldiers turned, mounted their horses with clumsy, nervous haste, and rode out of the valley, leaving a cloud of dust and an even heavier silence behind them. The news of Elena's defiance and the failed ambush reached Colonel Nathan Beaumont before sunset, carried by a furious Lieutenant Harris and a deeply suspicious Agent Thorne. Beaumont was forced to maintain his composure in front of Thorne, his face a mask of deep concern and shock at the revelations. He dismissed Elena as a hysterical victim. Gone native, her testimony tainted by the trauma and the subtle manipulations of the savage. He promised Thorne a full investigation into the ambush, while skillfully underscoring the agent's attention to the more pressing matter of the murdered miners. But after Agent Thorne had retired to the fort's guest quarters, and Beaumont was alone with the empty whiskey bottle in the darkness, the mask came off. Sam Kincaid was sitting in the corner, where he had been waiting, silent, for the entire report. "The girl is a problem," Kincaid rumbled, his voice like gravel. "A big one." "She is not a problem," Beaumont hissed, his polish cracking. "She is a traitor to her race and her god." He paced the office, his movements jerky and violent. "She was a lamb. She was supposed to be a sacrifice. But the wolf did not take the bait, and now the lamb has grown fangs. She talks, Colonel," Kincaid said, unimpressed by the dramatics. "And that agent, Thorne, he listens. If she tells him what she told Harris, your investigation is going to be a trial. Your trial." Beaumont slammed his fist on his desk. "She will not talk. She has sealed her fate. She has chosen the savage. Then she will die with the savage." He stopped pacing, his eyes alight with a new, colder fire. "She has not ruined the plan. She has merely simplified it. A rescue mission is no longer necessary. A punitive expedition. However, an action to punish the tribe that corrupted and abducted a white woman. Against her will, that is a story Washington will understand. His war was back on. And Elena Whitfield was no longer his pawn. She was his primary target. A week passed in the Comanche camp. The air had changed. Elena was no longer just the white woman. Her outburst had made her a symbol. To some, like Black Coyote. She was a symbol of the poison that weakened a warrior like Grey Wolf. To others, especially the women and the elders, she was a curiosity that had shown unexpected teeth. Stone Woman even grunted in approval when Elena, for the first time, successfully made a batch of berry cakes that did not taste like ash. The small, fragile bridge of respect between her and the Comanche was growing, but it was a bridge that isolated her completely from the world she had come from. The proof of this arrived on the back of a mule, a trader, one of the few neutrals allowed near the camp to maintain the pretense of the treaty talks, brought a mailbag. In it was a letter for her. It was from Lieutenant Charles Avery. She took it to the riverbank, her hands trembling as she broke the seal. She had not heard from him in almost 2 months. She had allowed herself to hope, in a secret, foolish part of her heart, that he would have heard of her mission and would be riding to her rescue, full of anger and love. The letter was cold steel. "My dearest Elena," it began, the salutation a painful formality. "I write to you in a state of grave concern. Reports have reached me here, even on the northern plains, of the unusual situation you find yourself in. I must confess, I am at a loss to understand your reasoning." She read on, her blood growing colder with each line. He did not ask if she was safe. He did not ask if she was afraid. He wrote of his own embarrassment. He wrote of the talk among the officer corps. "A lady's reputation," he wrote, "is a fragile and precious thing. It is the bedrock of her value. By consorting so openly with the natives, by living among them, you are bringing not only your own good name into question, but that of your father, and, by extension, my own." The next words were the ones that cut her to the bone. "I trust you will do nothing more to bring dishonor upon this engagement. This experiment is a test of your virtue. If that virtue is in any way compromised, or if the appearance of it is so damaged as to be irreparable, you must understand that our arrangement must be considered null and void. A soldier needs a wife who is, in all things, above reproach." She crushed the letter in her fist. He was not her fiancé. He was her judge. He was not worried about her life, but her reputation. He saw her as a piece of property that might be damaged. He, Colonel Beaumont, the Reverend, her own father, they were all the same. They had all used her. They had all, in their own way, sent her out to be sacrificed. She felt a profound, bottomless despair, a loneliness so complete it was a physical ache. She had no one. She had burned her bridge to the white world, and she did not belong in the new one. Her faith, the solid rock she had built her life upon, was fracturing. The God of her father, the God of obedience and rules, seemed very far away. A new, terrifying, and demanding faith was taking its place, a faith in the truth, a faith in what she had seen with her own eyes, and that faith had a name. It was not God, it was Grey Wolf. The camp was simmering with its own conflict. Beaumont's new, aggressive patrols were visible from the cliffs. His soldiers were pushing closer every day, a line of blue choking the valley. The Comanche scouts reported that the wagon trails were full of new soldiers, new guns. The peace was a lie, and war was coming. And the cause of it, in the eyes of many, was the white woman in Grey Wolf's teepee. Black Coyote found Grey Wolf by the horse herd, where he was checking a new colt's hoof. He did not come alone. He brought 5 other young warriors, men who, like him, were tired of the old men's peace and hungry for a war they had been trained for. "The soldiers come closer," Black Coyote said, his voice loud for all to hear. He spat on the ground. "They come for the white snake, the one you keep in your teepee." Grey Wolf did not look up. He continued to soothe the colt, running a hand down its leg. "She is not a snake. She is a weakness." Black Coyote took a step closer. "You were a warrior, the wolf, the ghost. Now you are a nursemaid to a white woman. You let her speak in council. You let her defy the soldiers, and her defiance brings them to our door. You are soft. She has bewitched you." Grey Wolf slowly stood, his full height. He looked at Black Coyote, his eyes flat and cold. "Be careful." "Or what?" Black Coyote sneered. "You will ask your woman to sing a song for me." He stepped closer, his hand on his knife. "The warriors are talking. Wolf, they say you are not a man. You have this woman in your lodge, this bride, but you do not treat her as a woman. You do not claim her. You do not own her." He lowered his voice to a deadly, insulting growl. "A woman is for one of 2 things. Wolf, to make sons, or to make war. If you will not use her for the first, perhaps you should give her to us. We will find a use for her. We will make her a proper symbol of war." It was the ultimate challenge. He had called Grey Wolf weak, and he had threatened to rape Elena. Grey Wolf moved. He did not draw a weapon. He simply struck, his open hand a blur of motion, a slap across Black Coyote's face that sounded like a rifle shot. It snapped the younger warrior's head back and sent him staggering. The other warriors tensed, their hands on their weapons. Black Coyote touched his split lip, his eyes wide with shock, then narrowing with murder. "You speak of her as a thing," Grey Wolf said, his voice low and shaking with a rage that terrified the men around him. "You speak of her as a piece of meat. You speak like the white men who killed my wife. You say she is a weakness, that woman, with no weapon, stood in front of the soldiers and spoke the truth. She showed more courage than any of you who whisper in the shadows." He stepped toward Black Coyote. who involuntarily took a step back. "You ask if she is my woman. You ask if I own her. She is not a horse to be owned. She is not a spoil of war. She is under my protection. She has my word, and my word is my honor." He looked around at the other warriors, his gaze like a physical blow. "She is not white. She is not Comanche. She is under my honor. If any of you lay a hand on her, if you even speak to her with disrespect, you are not touching a white woman. You are touching my honor, and I will kill you for it." He turned his back to them all and walked away, leaving Black Coyote shaking with humiliation and a new, deeper hatred. Elena had learned much in the previous weeks, including the value of trade. She had befriended a young Comanche girl named Little Wing, who had lost her family and was now cared for by Stone Woman. Little Wing was shy, but her eyes were bright and curious. She was fascinated by Elena, and Elena, in her loneliness, was grateful for the simple, human contact. One afternoon, a white trader named Silas, a filthy man with a tobacco-stained beard, was allowed into the camp to barter for hides. He was one of the few who still had permission from 10 Bears. Little Wing, her skill in bartering sharp, brought Elena along. Silas was drunk, and he was careless. He was speaking in low, angry tones to a half-breed man who worked for him. He did not know that Little Wing understood English perfectly, or that Elena was standing just out of sight, behind a stack of drying hides. "Is a fool," Silas muttered, taking a swig from a flask. "Kincaid is... Anyway, he leaves a trail a blind man could follow, but he pays in gold, pure gold." The half-breed grunted. "Beaumont's gold," Silas laughed, a wet, hacking sound. Beaumont ain't got that kind of gold. Beaumont's a pawn. He wants a star. No, this gold comes from the east, from the men who want the railroad, the men who want the land." Elena froze. "They pay Kincaid to keep the war alive," Silas said, spitting a stream of tobacco. "Keep the tribes riled up. See, then the army has to come in, wipe 'em out, and the land is clear. Clear for the railroad, clear for the mines. Beaumont is just the trigger. Kincaid is the bullet, but the money comes from very, very far away." The pieces clicked into place. It was not just one corrupt colonel. It was not just one racist fort. It was a machine, a huge, greedy machine of land and gold and railroads. And Beaumont was just one small, ambitious gear, and she and Grey Wolf were just grit, about to be crushed by it. That night, she sat in the teepee, the weight of it all Charles's letter, Black Coyote's hatred, the vast, shadowy conspiracy of the railroad. It was all too much. She felt small and hopeless and utterly, profoundly tired. Grey Wolf entered, ducking under the flap. He saw her face in the firelight. She was not crying, but her eyes were hollow, her spirit gone. "It is too much," she whispered, as if speaking to herself. "It is a lie, all of it. I thought I was a bride of peace, then a test. Now I learn I am just an excuse, a piece in a game for land and gold. I am nothing." She looked up at him, her eyes finally filling with tears that did not fall. "I was sent to test you, to prove you were a beast." A small, bitter laugh escaped her. "But I am the real test. Am I not? I am the one who brings the soldiers. I am the one who divides your people. I am just a burden, a white snake, just as he said." He had held his distance for so long. He had built a wall of ice around his heart, a wall of memory and duty and pain. And in that moment, her despair was the one thing that could shatter it. He crossed the fire. She flinched, expecting him to be angry. He knelt in front of her. She was sitting on her pallet, and he was on the dirt floor, his eyes now level with hers. He did not speak. He just looked at her, his gaze stripping away the lies and the titles. He slowly reached out his hand. He did not try to hold her. He did not try to touch her face. He just took her hand, her small, chapped, blistered hand. The contact was like a jolt of lightning. He lifted her hand, so small in his, and he placed it, palm down, against his chest, over his heart. She could feel it, the steady, powerful, living beat. It was warm. It was real. They sent you to test me, he said, his voice a low rumble that she felt in her own chest. That is the truth. He looked into her eyes. But you are wrong. It is I who is tested by you. He held her hand firmly against his heart. You test my anger. You test my memory. You test the cold place, the dead place inside me. His voice was raw. This was a confession. And I am not the same. He did not kiss her. He did not pull her close. He did not need to. In that one, shared moment, with her hand on his heart, every barrier between them, race, language, war, memory dissolved. They were no longer a white woman and a Comanche warrior. They were just Elena and Grey Wolf, and they were on the same side. The moment was broken by a shout from outside. A horse, ridden hard, galloped into the camp. A scout, his face grim, leaped from the animal and ran to the council lodge. Grey Wolf released her hand. He stood. He was a warrior again. Minutes later, 10 bears summoned him. When Grey Wolf returned, his face was granite. The soldiers are moving, he said. Not for the camp. They moved to the North Pass. Beaumont calls it a supply inspection. He has brought the big guns, the cannons. Elena stood. The last of her fear burned away, replaced by a cold, clear anger. It is not an inspection. It is an act of war. He is blockading the pass. He is doing it now because he knows Agent Thorne is sending reports. He is forcing the war before Washington can stop him. She looked at Grey Wolf, her eyes blazing with the same fire she now saw in his. We have to stop him. It is a trap, Grey Wolf said. I know, she said. But we have the truth. We have Boots. We have the sergeant's testimony. We have Silas the traitor's words. We must ride to the fort. We must go back. We have to tell Agent Thorne. We have to tell the other officers. It is the only way. The council was divided. 10 Bears was old, and he was tired, and he saw the trap. It is a trick, Grey Wolf said to his chief, in front of the council. But it is the only trick we have left. The woman is right. If we fight, we lose. If we hide, we lose. Our only chance is to use their own lies against them. It is our last chance for peace. I will ride. I will take the woman. I will speak the truth in their fort. 10 Bears looked at Elena, then at Grey Wolf. He nodded. Once. Go, he said. And may the Creator ride with you, because you ride into the wolf's mouth. They left the valley at dawn. Grey Wolf, Elena, and 10 warriors handpicked by 10 Bears. They were a small, fast-moving group. A diplomatic mission that looked very much like a war party. Elena rode the hardy mare Grey Wolf had given her, her ruined white dress long since abandoned. She now wore a simple buckskin dress, a gift from Stone Woman. It was more practical, and in the chill morning air, far warmer. But as she put it on, she felt another piece of her old self shedding away, like a dead skin. The journey back to Fort Redemption was a wire pulled taut. Every mile closer to the fort, the air grew heavier. The weight of what they were doing, what she had done, settled on Elena like a physical shroud. They were riding to confront a colonel, to accuse the United States Army of murder, all on the word of a traitorous woman and a savage warrior. The chance of failure was not just high, it was absolute. With every stop they made, Elena felt the pressure build. At night, the warriors would set a cold camp, no fires, and the men would take turns on watch, their forms silent shadows against the rocks. Grey Wolf did not sleep. He sat, his rifle across his knees, and watched the darkness, his body a coiled spring. And from the darkness, they were also watched. Far behind them, moving like a ghost on their trail, was Black Coyote. He was not part of the honor guard. He was following for his own reasons. He rode alone, his heart a cold knot of anger and a new, unsettling curiosity. He had seen Grey Wolf defend the woman and had heard him pledge his own honor as her shield. It was a madness he could not understand, and he had to see where it led. He had to see if the greatest warrior of his generation would be destroyed by this white snake, or if this was some new, strange, and powerful medicine. On the third day, they reached the railroad tracks. The 2 lines of steel were a shocking, violent scar across the open prairie, a line of cold. unbending iron that signaled the end of the world Grey Wolf knew, and the beginning of the one that had consumed Elena. They followed the tracks to a way station, a miserable collection of wood frame shacks and canvas tents that had sprung up to serve the railroad crews and the soldiers. It was called Last Chance Crossing. It was the final stop before Fort Redemption, which was still a half-day's ride. It was a place where all the poisons of the frontier mixed: soldiers, buffalo hunters, railroad men, and a few Kiowa trackers all drank at the same filthy saloon. When Grey Wolf led his party into the town, it was as if a scythe had cut through the noise. The fiddle music from the saloon stopped. Men, their faces hard and bearded, stepped out onto the boardwalk, their hands on their guns. They saw the Comanche warriors, and then they saw her. They saw a white woman, her hair in a loose braid, wearing a Comanche dress, riding with them. Not as a prisoner, but as one of them. The innkeeper, a heavy man with a dirty apron and a face like a bulldog, came to the door of his establishment. He took in the scene, his eyes lingering on Elena with a look of such profound, greasy disgust that she felt physically ill. "We need food, and water for the horses," Grey Wolf said, his voice flat. He threw a silver coin on the boardwalk. The innkeeper looked at the coin, then back at Elena. "We serve your kind out back," he said. Then he looked at Elena. "And her kind, too, I reckon." The men on the boardwalk laughed, a low, ugly sound. The white bride of the Indian. Looks like he tamed her real good. Or maybe she tamed him. Elena's face burned hot with shame. This was her world. This was her civilization. The men sneering at her were the men she was raised to believe were her protectors. She felt a wave of self-loathing and humiliation so deep it made her dizzy. She was an outcast, a creature, a thing to be gaped at. Grey Wolf ignored them. He took the horses to the trough himself. He posted 2 of his men on the roof of the stable, their rifles visible. He paid for the food, hard biscuits and jerky, and brought it to where Elena sat on a crate, her head bowed, trying to disappear. They would not ride on. The horses were exhausted, and they needed to arrive at the fort fresh. Grey Wolf paid the innkeeper an outrageous sum for the use of a small, canvas-walled room behind the main building, a place usually rented by the hour. "You will rest here," he said to Elena. "It is not safe to be seen." The room was suffocating. It was barely 8 feet square, with a dirt floor, a rickety cot, and it smelled of old whiskey and sweat. Grey Wolf stood outside the door, his arms crossed, an immovable guard, while his men settled in the stables. As the sun went down, the sounds of the saloon grew louder. The fiddle started again, along with the harsh, drunken laughter of men. Elena sat on the cot in the darkness, her body shaking. The full weight of her choice had finally landed. She was a traitor. The word echoed in her mind. She had betrayed her race. She had betrayed her faith. She had betrayed her family, her father, her fiancé. She thought of Charles's letter, his cold, clinical rejection. He was worried about her reputation. And what was she doing? She was about to ride into a military fort to accuse a decorated colonel of treason, all to protect a people who were not her own, all to defend a man who was, by every law of her society, her sworn enemy. A sob, hot and ragged, tore its way out of her chest. It was not a quiet, ladylike cry. It was a breakdown. The tears she had held back for weeks, the tears of fear, of shame, of loneliness, of profound, aching confusion, they all came at once. She was crying into her hands when the canvas flap lifted. Grey Wolf stood in the doorway, a dark silhouette against the torchlit yard. He had heard her. He stepped inside and let the flap fall, plunging the tiny room into near total darkness, lit only by the faint, smoky moonlight that filtered through the canvas. "You are afraid," he said. It was not a question. "I am a fool," she wept, her voice thick and broken. "I am a thing for everyone to use." She looked up at him, her face streaked with tears and dirt. "Do you know what I thought when I first saw you, when I was told I was to be your bride?" He just watched her, his face impossible to read in the gloom. "I was raised to believe," She stumbled, the confession pouring out of her. "I thought you were a beast, a savage. I thought God helped me. I thought I was on a mission. To tame you. To prove that my God, my world, was stronger than you." She laughed. A horrible, broken sound. "I was a puppet. I was a puppet in Colonel Beaumont's dirty game. A test for him and a test for you." She looked down at her hands, now twisting in her lap. "But it is all a lie. I am not on his side anymore. But I do not belong to your side. I am a traitor to everyone. I am just lost. And tomorrow we will ride into that fort, and they will hang us. They will hang you for a savage, and they will hang me for a traitor. And I am more afraid of losing." She could not say it. She could not tell you. "I am more afraid of failing," she finished, the sob choking her. "I am so afraid." He stood like a stone, listening to her confession. He had heard the word beast and had not flinched. He had heard her shame, and he had heard her fear. And when she said she was a puppet, he moved. He did not kneel. He did not offer a word of comfort. He simply stepped forward, took her by the arms, and pulled her to her feet. He was so much taller than her. The small room felt suddenly full of him, of his warmth, of his strength. He pulled her close. It was not a request. It was a command, a strong, sure, and impossibly gentle embrace. He did not crush her. He simply held her. He pulled her against the solid wall of his chest and let her rest her forehead against his buckskin shirt. One of his hands was firm on her back, supporting her. The other hand came up, gently, and settled on the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her loose hair, holding her steady. Elena froze, her hands trapped between them. She could feel his heart, beating slow and steady, a powerful rhythm beneath her ear. She could smell the wood smoke and the pine on his skin. He said nothing. He just held her, absorbing her shudders, shielding her from the drunken, ugly world that was yelling and laughing just a few feet away. After a long moment, when her sobs had quieted to small, hitching breaths, he spoke. His voice was a low, deep rumble, a vibration that she felt more than heard. "They sent you to test me," he whispered into her hair. "That is true, but they did not know. You have made me see my own heart." He held her a fraction tighter. "I swore when I lost my family that my heart was dead, a cold, stone place. I lived to be a ghost, to fight, to die. And then you, this small, white woman. You were the test. You tested the stone. You tested the cold." His hand moved from her hair, his thumb brushing, so lightly, against her tear-wet cheek. "I swear to you, Elena," he said, and his voice was raw, thick with an emotion that shook her to her core. "Whatever happens at that fort tomorrow, whatever the spirits decree, you will not be a sacrifice again. You will not be a puppet. Not for them. Not for me." He pulled back, just enough to look down at her face, though he still held her firmly by the shoulders. His dark eyes, in the dim light, were blazing. "To me, you are already mine. You are my honor, my woman. You are mine, until the day you look at me and you say you are not." It was a vow. It was that she was his forever, but it was a promise that gave her all the power. It was not ownership. It was a pledge. Elena stared up at him. Her breath caught in her throat. The man who had been a beast in her mind, a monster, a savage, had just given her a freedom and a respect that no one, not Charles, not her father, not her colonel, had ever offered. He had seen her soul, and he had claimed it, but only if she willed it. She did not think. She acted. Her body, her heart, her very soul, which had been at war, suddenly found its true north. She raised herself on her toes. Her hands, which had been pressed against his chest, slid up to his shoulders, her fingers gripping him, and she stretched up, trembling but certain, and pressed her mouth to his. It was a clumsy, desperate, tear-salted kiss. For one heart-stopping second, he became rigid. He was as still as the stone he claimed to be, and then the stone broke. A sound came from deep in his chest, a low groan of a man who had been starving for 1,000 years. He kissed her back. It was not short. and it was not gentle. It was deep, and it was devastating. It was all the loneliness, all the repressed pain, all the hunger, all the longing of a man who thought his life was over, unleashed in one powerful, consuming kiss. His hand that was on her back slid down, pulling her hips flush against his, and his other hand held her head, tilting it, his mouth taking hers with a desperate, pent-up ferocity. Elena's world dissolved. There was no fort, no war, no shame. There was only this heat, this strength, this man. She kissed him back with all the fear and all the hope and all the fight she had in her. His arms wrapped around her like steel bands, lifting her, crushing her to him. She could feel the hard muscles of his chest, his arms, his legs. He was powerful, and he was lost in her. And then, just as she felt she would be consumed, that the fire would burn them both down to ash, he stopped. He tore his mouth from hers, his whole body shuddering. He rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed, his breathing ragged. He had felt it. The moment he was about to cross the line, the moment the hunger, the need, would have overwhelmed the vow he had just made. And he had stopped. He had stopped. He had respected her, even in the depths of his own passion. He had respected himself. That restraint, that control, was more sexy, more intoxicating to her than the kiss itself. "Elena," he breathed, his voice broken. It was the first time he had said her name like that, not as a statement, but as a prayer. They did not speak again. He did not claim her. The marriage bed was not crossed, but he did not leave her. He took her hand and led her to the small cot. He sat, his back against the wall, and pulled her down to sit beside him, her back resting against his chest, his arms around her. He reached for the single, thin blanket, and he draped it over them both. They sat there, in the darkness, for hours. They were not lovers, but they were so much more. He was a warm, solid presence behind her, his chin resting on the top of her head. They listened to the sounds of the drunken men outside, but the noise could not touch them. They heard, in the far distance, the long, lonely whistle of a night train, the sound of the white world, the sound of the future, and they talked, in low whispers. He told her about a boy named Little Hawk, his son, who had loved to chase grasshoppers. He told her about his wife, Mourning Dove, who had taught him how to laugh. He spoke of his childhood, of the smell of the buffalo herds, of the day he had gotten his vision. And she, in turn, told him about Boston, about her stern father, about her mother, who had died, and who had loved to press flowers in a book. She told him about her dream of being a teacher, her real dream, not the one she had been living. They shared their scars, their ghosts, their simple, broken human stories. It was not a night of passion. It was a night of profound, absolute, and soul-bare intimacy. It was the true wedding night of their hearts. Outside, in the shadows of the stable, Black Coyote watched. He had crept close, drawn by a premonition. He had not seen the kiss, but he had seen, through a tear in the canvas, the warrior and the white woman sitting on the cot, wrapped in one blanket. He had seen the intimacy, the profound and unmistakable belonging. He saw Grey Wolf, the ghost, the lonely warrior, holding the white snake as if she were a treasure. He understood. His rival was not bewitched. He was bound. He was bound to her in a way that went beyond politics, beyond war. Black Coyote slipped back into the darkness, his heart a confusion of anger and a strange, grudging respect. He did not know if this made Grey Wolf weaker or if it made him stronger, but he knew, with a sudden certainty, that when the battle came at the fort tomorrow, he would not be standing against him. When the first pale gray light of morning filtered through the canvas, Elena woke. She was still on the cot, but she was alone. The blanket was tucked tightly around her. Grey Wolf was standing at the small, cracked mirror, splashed with water, tying his hair back. He turned and looked at her, and everything was different. He was calm, but the distance in his eyes, the cold, wary space, was gone. When he looked at her now, he was not looking at a test or a burden. He was not looking at a prisoner he had to protect. He was looking at his woman, at his partner. She was no longer Elena Whitfield, the virgin bride. She was Elena, and she had chosen. "It is time," Grey Wolf said, his voice quiet. "We ride." They saw Fort Redemption from 5 miles out. It was no longer the sleepy, dusty outpost Elena had arrived at. It was an ant's nest kicked over. The stockade walls were bristling with new activity. The number of soldiers walking the ramparts had doubled. Elena could see the dark, ugly snouts of new Gatling guns pointed out over the plains, covering the main gate. And, on the newly reinforced gun platform, were 2 heavy field cannons, their muzzles aimed directly at the pass that led to the Comanche lands. The fort was not waiting for a treaty. It was preparing for a war. As Grey Wolf, Elena, and their 10-warrior escort approached, a bugle sounded, a high, nervous cry. The main gates, which had been open, were swung shut. A palpable wave of hostility washed out from the walls. Elena, riding in her buckskin dress, her hair in a single braid down her back, felt the stares. They were like physical blows. The soldiers on the walls were not leering at her now. They were looking at her with a cold, hard hatred. She was not the virgin bride anymore. She was the Indian's woman, a traitor. They waited in the dust for a full 10 minutes before a small side gate opened. Lieutenant Harris emerged, his face pale and slick with sweat. He was not alone. With him was the government agent, Mr. Thorne, his black suit looking ridiculous and out of place in the military bustle, and behind them, his uniform immaculate, his face a perfect mask of paternal concern, came Colonel Nathan Beaumont. "Miss Whitfield," Beaumont cried, his voice carrying across the parade ground. He strode toward her, his hands outstretched. "My child, we have been God. We have been sick with worry. We were certain they had harmed you." He reached for her, as if to help her down. Elena flinched, pulling her horse back a step, out of his reach. The gesture was small, but it was a public refusal. Beaumont's eyes, for a fraction of a second, became cold. The concern vanished, replaced by a flat, reptilian anger. Then, just as quickly, the mask of the worried commander snapped back into place. "You see," he said softly, turning to Mr. Thorne. "The poor girl is terrified. She is not herself." "I am perfectly myself, Colonel," Elena said, her voice clear and carrying in the sudden silence. She slid from her horse, unaided. She did not feel like a lady. She felt like a warrior. She stood beside Grey Wolf, and she was not ashamed. "She is not a prisoner, Colonel," Grey Wolf said, his voice a low rumble. He did not dismount. He sat on his war pony, his rifle resting across his lap, his eyes scanning the walls, the cannons, the soldiers. He and his 10 men were surrounded. "She is here as a witness. We are here to speak the truth." "The truth," Beaumont laughed. A short, sharp bark. "Agent Thorne, I ask you, what truth can one expect from this?" He gestured to Grey Wolf. "Or from this poor, deluded girl?" "I believe," Mr. Thorne said, his voice dry and precise, "that is what we are here to determine. We were in a council, Colonel. It was interrupted. I suggest we resume it. In your office." The air in Beaumont's office was suffocating. It was packed. Beaumont sat behind his great desk. The map of his war spread out before him. Agent Thorne sat to one side. Lieutenant Harris stood by the wall, looking as if he wished the earth would swallow him, and in the corner, his thumbs hooked in his gun belt, a smug, contemptuous look on his face, was Sam Kincaid, Grey Wolf. Elena and 2 of his warriors had been allowed inside. The other 8 were outside, in the yard, surrounded by twice their number of blue-coated soldiers. "Now," Beaumont began, all pretense of concern gone, replaced by crisp, military authority. "Let us end this farce. Agent Thorne, I'm glad you are here to witness this. We have offered peace, and in return, the Comanche have taken one of our own." "I was not taken," Elena snapped. I was sent by you. I had a test. Miss Whitfield." Beaumont sighed, shaking his head with mock pity. "You have been through a trauma. Your mind is confused." "My mind," Elena said, stepping forward, "has never been more clear. I demand to speak. Not as your child, not as a victim, but as the witness you have made me." Thorne, the agent, leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "Colonel, I must insist. Let the woman speak. Let us have the testimony. And then we will have the facts." Beaumont gave a magnanimous wave of his hand. "Very well. Let her purge herself. Let us hear the fantasy." Elena took a deep breath. She did not look at Beaumont. She looked at Agent Thorne. She told him everything. She spoke of the first journey. She spoke of the dust storm. And she spoke of the ambush. "They were dressed as Comanche," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "But they were not. They were white men. They wore army boots. The sergeant who was there, he saw them. Lieutenant Harris saw them. They carried Spencer repeaters. And they were the ones who tried to abduct me. After your soldiers, Colonel, had already assaulted me at the gate. Lieutenant Harris looked like he was going to faint." "That is a lie," Beaumont said, his voice flat. "Is it?" Elena pressed. Then she spoke of the camp. She spoke of 10 bears. She spoke of the women, the children. She spoke of their actual desire for a treaty, their confusion as to why the soldiers kept pushing, kept provoking. She finished. The room was silent. Grey Wolf stepped forward, standing beside her. He looked at Thorne, and his voice, though quiet, filled the room. "We are not perfect," he said. His English measured. "We are men. We have fought. We have bled. But we did not do the things your colonel claims. We did not attack those miners. We did not burn those farms. His war is a lie. We want peace. He wants our land." It was a powerful, simple declaration. Thorne looked at Beaumont, his expression unreadable. Beaumont, however, was prepared. He smiled. "A touching speech, truly, from both of you." He nodded to the corner. "Mr. Kincaid." Sam Kincaid swaggered forward. He dropped a thick leather satchel on Beaumont's desk. It landed with a heavy thud. "Touching, sure," Kincaid sneered. "But peaceful. That ain't what my reports say." He pulled out a sheaf of papers. "This here is an affidavit, signed by the 2 survivors of the Miller Creek mine. Swore on a Bible they were hit by Comanche. Described 'em perfectly, right down to the war paint. This one," he slapped down another paper, "is from the settler at the Double Horn Pass. His barn burned to the ground. His cattle driven off, arrows left in his dead horses. Comanche arrows." "Lies!" Elena cried. "Are they?" Kincaid smiled at her. "Funny. Seems the only person who thinks the Comanche are peaceful is the white woman who's been sleeping in their chief's teepee." The insult hung in the air, thick and poisonous. The other officers shuffled their feet. "That is enough, Kincaid," Beaumont said, raising a hand. The perfect picture of a gentleman defending a lady's honor. "This is not about Miss Whitfield's personal choices. This is about facts." He turned to Thorne. "You see, sir, their word against signed, sworn testimony, against facts, against a pattern of violence we have seen for 20 years. He leaned back in his chair. "No, I am afraid the truth is much sadder. This poor woman has been compromised. She is, as we say, bewitched. She has lost her perspective. She is no longer objective. And I have proof," Beaumont said, his voice dropping. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a familiar, cream-colored envelope. Elena's blood went cold. "A letter," Beaumont said, "from her fiancé, a fine, upstanding young officer, Lieutenant Charles Avery. It arrived just this morning. He was responding to her own letters, I imagine." He unfolded it. He writes, "I must confess, I am at a loss to understand your reasoning. I trust you will do nothing more to bring dishonor upon this engagement. And this is the most telling part." He writes, "A soldier needs a wife who is, in all things, above reproach." Beaumont placed the letter on the desk. Above reproach, he feared for her stability. He feared she was losing her way. Even he, a man who loves her, saw that she was weak, impressionable, easily led astray by exotic notions. He looked at Thorne. So, I ask you, whose testimony do you believe, that of a decorated officer, of a dozen sworn witnesses, or that of a hysterical, compromised woman who has been publicly disavowed by her own fiancé and who is clearly infatuated with her captor? It was a perfect, brilliant, and utterly evil checkmate. He had used her own past, her own fiancé, her own gender, to utterly destroy her credibility. Elena felt the floor drop out from under her. She looked at the faces of the officers. They were nodding. They understood this logic. A weak woman, a fallen woman, a hysterical woman. Her testimony was worthless. She looked at Grey Wolf. He was staring at Beaumont, his face a mask of such pure, cold murder that it frightened her. He was going to kill him. He was going to draw his knife, and he would be shot down. And this would all be for nothing. And at that moment, something inside her broke. Not her spirit, her chains. She began to laugh. It was not a hysterical laugh. It was a low, cold, angry sound that shocked every man in the room. She looked at Beaumont, and her eyes were dry and blazing. "You are right about one thing, Colonel," she said, her voice clear and hard as ice. "I am not the woman who left this fort. That woman was a fool. She was a puppet. She believed in men like you." She turned from him and faced Agent Thorne directly. She would not be dismissed. "Do you want the truth?" she asked him. "The real truth? Or is this just a performance for the man from Washington?" Thorne, startled by her ferocity, said nothing. "You say I am bewitched," Elena continued, her voice rising. "You say I am infatuated. Let me tell you what I am. I am awake for the first time in my life. You talk about my side. You talk about my people. Let me tell you about my people." She pointed at Kincaid. "My people include a man who dresses in paint to murder miners for gold. My people include a man," she pointed at the trembling Lieutenant Harris, "who is too much of a coward to tell the truth, even when he sees it with his own eyes. And then," she pointed her finger directly at the colonel, "and my people include you, a man who would send a woman he calls child, to be bait in a trap, a man who would use his uniform to cover his lies, his murders, his greed. You did not know I heard Silas the traitor. You did not know I learned about the railroad, about the money you are all being paid to keep the war alive. You are not soldiers. You are murderers for hire, and you are the worst savage I have ever met." "That is enough," Beaumont roared, his face purple, the mask of civilization completely gone. He was on his feet, his hand on his pistol. "Guards, guards. Arrest this woman. She is a traitor. She is conspiring with the enemy. Arrest her. Arrest them all." Two soldiers near the door, their faces pale, moved forward, their rifles raising. It happened in a heartbeat. Grey Wolf was not a man. He was a shadow. He moved, not forward, but sideways, placing his body directly in front of Elena's. He did not draw his knife. He did not raise his rifle. He just stood, a shield. And the two Comanche warriors who were with him raised their rifles. The click-click of the hammers being pulled back was deafening in the small room. Instantly, every soldier in the room, Kincaid, even Lieutenant Harris, drew their weapons. Pistols were cocked. Rifles were leveled. It was a standoff. 10 guns were pointed at Grey Wolf and his warriors. 10 rifles were pointed back. And Elena was in the absolute, silent center of it. "I gave you an order," Beaumont screamed at the soldiers. "Fire, shoot them down." No one moved. The soldiers were staring at Grey Wolf, at his men, and they knew firing meant they all died. "Fire, damn you! Colonel!" The scream came from outside. It was the watchtower. "Colonel, look! Look at the ridge." Every man in the room, except Grey Wolf, flinched and looked toward the window. Beaumont, his face a mask of confusion, strode to the window and looked out. His face went white. Elena moved to the window to see. The entire North Ridge, the one that overlooked the fort, was lined with them. It was not hundreds, but there were many, 50, perhaps 60, Comanche warriors, sitting on their horses in a long, silent line. They were not charging. They were not screaming. They were just watching. At their head, on a black and white Pinto, was Black Coyote. He had followed them. He had brought his warriors. He had, in his own way, come to see the end of the game. A single warrior rode down from the ridge, a white truce flag on a lance. He stopped just out of rifle range. "We are not here to fight," he shouted, his voice echoing across the plain. "We are here to watch the warrior, Gray Wolf, and the woman who speaks the truth are in your lodge. We are here to see if the white man's peace is true, if they are harmed, if one hair on their head is touched. We will know your treaty is a lie, and we will make this fort a grave." The threat hung in the air, cold and absolute. Beaumont was trapped. The lie had come full circle. He could not fight his way out. He had 50 warriors on his ridge, 10 warriors in his office, and a government agent who had seen everything. The other officers in the room visibly lowered their weapons. Agent Thorne stood up. He was no longer a politician. He was a judge. "Colonel Beaumont," he said, his voice like cracking ice. "Stand your men down." "That is an order," Beaumont began. "I said stand. Your men down." Thorne's voice was a whip. "You are relieved of command. This fort is, as of this moment, under the authority of the United States Department of the Interior, pending a full criminal investigation." He looked at the other officers. "Lieutenant Harris, you will resume temporary command of this garrison. You will secure the colonel's sidearm, and you will all holster your weapons." Slowly, one by one, the sound of pistols being uncocked, of rifles being lowered, filled the room. Beaumont, his face a mottled, uncomprehending mask of rage and defeat, allowed Harris to numbly take his pistol from its holster. The standoff was over. The war had been stopped, not with a bang, but with the truth. Elena, her legs finally giving out, leaned back, Gray Wolf's hand, strong and steady, found her waist, holding her up. He had not moved. He had not flinched. He had simply waited. He had trusted her to fight the battle of words, just as she trusted him to fight the battle of knives. And together, they had won. The revolution in Colonel Beaumont's office was one of words, not yet of bullets. Agent Thorne, backed by the sudden shocking appearance of Black Coyote's warriors on the ridge, had seized control. Beaumont was a colonel no more. He was a prisoner, but the fort was a long way from Washington. Thorne, a man of paper and law, followed protocol. He did not have the authority to clap a decorated colonel in irons on the spot, not with 50 armed Comanche warriors at his gate demanding a truth he was not even sure of. He did the only thing he could. He placed Colonel Beaumont under quarters arrest, confined to his office, with 2 guards posted at his door, to await a full, formal inquiry. Kincaid, a civilian, was simply ordered to remain in the fort. It was a fatal miscalculation. Thorne understood politics. He did not understand a desperate man. For 3 hours, the fort was a powder keg with a slow fuse. Agent Thorne was in the telegraph office, sending coded messages to his superiors. Lieutenant Harris, a young man broken by the day, was numbly trying to restore order to a garrison that had just seen its commander overthrown. And Elena and Gray Wolf waited. They were not prisoners, but they were not free. They were witnesses, quartered in the relative safety of the post infirmary. While Gray Wolf's men were given the hospitality of the stables, under armed, if now very nervous, guard outside Beaumont's office, a young corporal named Elias Cole stood watch. He was one of the soldiers who had been in Elena's Sunday reading class. He was a boy from a farm in Ohio, and he hated this land. He had seen the ambush on the trail. He had seen the army boots on the dead men. He was the sergeant's nephew, and he was sick with guilt. Through the door, he could hear voices, low and vibrating with rage. For an hour, the colonel had been silent, but now he was not alone. "You let that woman and that agent just take it all." It was Kincaid's voice. He must have climbed in through the window. "Shut up and listen." Beaumont's voice was no longer smooth. It was a raw, jagged thing. "He has not won. Thorne is a fool. He thinks his paper is stronger than a bullet. We have one night, one move. What move? We are finished. We are finished if we stay, Beaumont hissed.
But if we act, if we force the hand, we ride. We are riding now. We do not ride south. We rode north, to the North Canyon. We hit the main camp. We kill 10 bears. We kill the old men. That is suicide. It is just us. It is not suicide, you idiot. It is a strategy. In the morning, when Thorne finds us gone, when he hears the drums, when he hears the camp is under attack, what will he think? He will think the Comanche broke the truce. He will think we were right. He thought we rode to warn the settlers, and were overwhelmed. Or, we ride in, we kill the chief, and we blame it on a faction. We blame Black Coyote. We create chaos. In chaos, I am in command again. A war, a real war, is the only thing that can burn this investigation to the ground. It is our last hand, and we will play it. Corporal Cole's blood went ice cold. He heard the sound of a window slowly, quietly opening. He did not run to Lieutenant Harris. Harris was a coward. He ran, his boots pounding in the dust. To the one person in the fort who was not, he burst into the infirmary, his rifle in his hand, his face white. Elena was standing by the window, watching the silent line of warriors on the ridge. Grey Wolf was at her side. "Ma'am, Miss Whitfield, you got to," the corporal panted. "Corporal, what is it?" "He is gone, ma'am," Cole gasped, his eyes wide with terror. "The colonel, he is gone. Kincaid was with him. They went out the back window. I heard them. They are riding to the North Canyon. They said they are going to kill 10 bears. They are going to attack the camp. Oh God, ma'am, they are going to kill them all." Elena's hand flew to her mouth, but Grey Wolf was already moving. He did not question. He did not wait. He grabbed the corporal by the front of his shirt. How long? A dozen, maybe. Hired men Kincaid had. They just left. 5 minutes. No more. Grey Wolf released him and looked at Elena. There was no "I told you so." There was no despair. There was only a cold, hard fire. "This is his last move," Grey Wolf said. "He is not just starting a war," Elena said, the horror dawning. "He is trying to win it. He is trying to slaughter the old, the weak. He is a monster," Grey Wolf finished. He was already out the door, running for the stables. When they burst into the stable yard, his 10 warriors were already on their feet, their weapons in hand. Hearing the alarm in his voice, the guards, young privates, raised their rifles. "Stand down," Elena shouted, shocking them. "The colonel has escaped. He has gone to attack the Comanche camp. We are the only ones who can stop him." The guards hesitated, their faces a mask of confusion. "It is true," Corporal Cole shouted, running up behind them. "I heard him. It is treason." That was the word that broke the spell of command. The guards lowered their rifles. Grey Wolf and his men were already saddling their horses, their movements fast, fluid, and silent. "You," Grey Wolf said, pointing to Elena. "You stay. It is not your fight." "The hell it is not," she spat, pulling a saddle onto her own mare. "He is doing this because of me. He is doing this to silence me. I am not a lady to be protected. Grey Wolf, I am your partner. I ride." He looked at her for one hard second. He saw the woman who had kissed him in the dark. He saw the woman who had accused a colonel in his own office. He nodded. "Once. Ride," he said. They burst from the main gate of Fort Redemption like a volley of bullets. 13 riders in the dark, 10 warriors. Elena, Grey Wolf, and Corporal Ellis Cole, who had, in that moment, chosen his side. As they cleared the gate and thundered onto the plain, a new sound joined their own. A second group of riders, fast and dark, was coming down from the ridge. It was Black Coyote. He and his 50 warriors had seen the first, smaller group Beaumonts leave the fort. They had seen the second, larger group Grey Wolves give chase. Black Coyote pulled his horse up, his warriors fanning out behind him. He looked at Grey Wolf. No words were needed. The treachery was plain. This was not a white man's trap. This was a white man's betrayal of all things, and it was aimed at his people. "They ride to the North Canyon," Grey Wolf shouted, not slowing. "To kill the elders." Black Coyote's face became a mask of stone. He had hated Grey Wolf for his peace, but he would ride with him against a treachery this deep. He gave a sharp, high cry, a war cry.
and his 50 warriors merged with Grey Wolf's, a single, dark river of vengeance, thundering through the moonlight. Beaumont was not a fool, but he was an arrogant man. Kincaid, however, was not, and Kincaid was the one who had set the trap. "They'll follow, Colonel," Kincaid had said. As they rode, "The wolf will follow. He has to. Let him," Beaumont had spat, his face twisted with hate. "Oh, I plan to. They did not ride all the way to the North Canyon. They stopped at the mouth, at a narrow pass known as the Needle's Eye. It was a place of high, sheer rock walls, a perfect natural ambush. Kincaid had placed his 10 hired guns high on the ridges, rifles resting, waiting. He and Beaumont were on a high ledge, looking down into the trap. He rides in and we seal both ends, slaughter them all. Then, onto the camp," Kincaid had said, checking his rifle. But Grey Wolf knew his enemy. He knew this land. He held up his hand, his party of 60 riders skidding to a halt a mile from the canyon's mouth. The air was too still. "He is not riding to the camp," Grey Wolf said, his voice low. "He is not foolish. He is waiting." "Waiting," Black Coyote growled, his horse stamping. "For us. He waits for me," Grey Wolf said. He looked at the high, dark ridges, invisible in the gloom. "Kincaid, he is there, on the high rocks." "Then we are trapped," Elena said, her heart sinking. "No," Grey Wolf said. He looked at Black Coyote. "He is on the rocks, but we will be in the sky." He pointed to a thin, barely visible crack in the cliff face, a goat path, a trail only a Comanche would know. "We climb. We come down on them from above." The battle for the North Canyon was not a battle of rifles and lines. It was a silent, brutal, close-quarters war fought in the dark, on treacherous ledges, between shadows. Grey Wolf, Black Coyote, and 20 of their best warriors, including Elena, who refused to be left behind, made the long, arduous climb. They left the horses below. It was knife work. They found Kincaid's men, one by one, a shadow detaching from a rock, a hand over a mouth, a silent, wet sound. The Comanche were ghosts, reclaiming the night, and the hired guns, who had been watching the canyon floor, never saw death coming from the sky above them. But Kincaid was not a hired gun. He was a wolf, like Grey Wolf. He heard a pebble dislodge. He saw a shadow that did not belong. The world exploded in gunfire. Kincaid was on his feet, his pistol blazing. "They are above us! Above us!" he roared. The fight dissolved into a chaos of muzzle flashes, screams, and falling bodies. Grey Wolf saw only one man. He saw Kincaid, reloading by a dark pinnacle of rock. He launched himself across the gap, tackling the larger man. They went down, rolling, their rifles lost. They came up with knives. "I remember you," Kincaid spat, his teeth bared in the moonlight, his arm bleeding. You led the raid." Grey Wolf's voice was a low, choking growl, as he parried a thrust. "My village, my wife, my son, it was you." Kincaid froze for a second, surprised. Then he laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "That one, just a job. Injun, a little fire, a little blood. Beaumont paid good for that one. 2, just like," Grey Wolf roared. It was not a human sound. It was the sound of a heart breaking, of a soul tearing. He did not fight with skill. He fought with a pure, black, focused rage. He was the wolf. He was the ghost. He was the vengeance of all he had lost. Kincaid was a fighter, but he was fighting for money. Grey Wolf was fighting for his dead son. It was not a long fight. Grey Wolf's knife found its mark. Once, twice, 3 times. Kincaid, his eyes wide with a final, gurgling surprise, slumped, his own pistol going off in a dying spasm. The bullet struck Grey Wolf in the side, low, just above his hip. He did not feel it. He just felt the hot, wet release of the man's life ending. And he slumped against the rock, his arm, his side, his body, finally, numb. Below, in the canyon, the chaos was total. Beaumont, seeing his ambush fail, his men being killed, was a trapped rat. He was trying to get to his horse, firing his pistol blindly into the shadows. Elena, who had been told to stay back, had been separated from Grey Wolf in the first volley. She was scrambling down a lower path when she saw him, Beaumont. He was not a colonel. He was a wild man, his uniform torn, his face black with powder and hate. "It is over! Colonel!" she screamed, her voice raw. "Stop! Your men are dead! It is over!" He turned. He saw her, his virgin bride, his traitor, the lamb with fangs. His face, in the moonlight, was a mask of pure, insane hatred. "You," he hissed. You did this, you bitch!" He raised his pistol, his hand steadying. He aimed it directly at her heart. Elena had no time to move, no time to scream. A shot cracked through the canyon. It did not sound like the other shots. It was a high, sharp crack. Beaumont screamed. It was not a scream of death, but of agony. His pistol flew from his hand, which exploded in a shower of blood. Elena stared, uncomprehending. On the ridge opposite, silhouetted against the pale, rising moon, was Black Coyote. His rifle was smoking. He did not look at Elena. He looked at the man he had just disarmed. He had not killed him. He had unmanned him, in the way a warrior understands. He had taken his fangs. At that moment, Lieutenant Harris and a dozen blue-coated soldiers, led by a frantic Corporal Cole, thundered into the canyon. They had followed, too late for the battle, but not for the judgment. They saw it all. They saw their colonel, disarmed, howling, clutching his ruined hand. They saw the dead hired guns. They saw Elena, alive. They saw the 60 Comanche warriors, their rifles smoking, looking down from the ridges. Harris, his face pale, finally made his choice. He dismounted. He walked past Elena, his eyes full of a new, hard respect. He walked past the screaming colonel. He looked up at Black Coyote, and he nodded. A strange, silent salute. Then he walked to Beaumont, and he kicked the man's dropped pistol away. "Colonel Nathan Beaumont," Harris said, his voice shaking but clear. "You are under arrest, for treason, and for murder." The war was over. The adrenaline faded, and Elena's world came rushing back. "Grey Wolf!" She turned, scrambling back up the rocks, her hands bleeding, her dress tearing. "Grey Wolf. Where is he?" She found him. He was not on the ledge. He had fallen, slumped at the base of the rock pinnacle, half hidden in the shadows. His warriors were just reaching him. Grey Wolf. He was pale, so pale. He was leaning against the rock, his eyes closed. His hand was pressed to his side, and the blood there was so much blood, black in the moonlight, covering his hand, his leg, the rock beneath him. He had killed Kincaid, but Kincaid had killed him, too. "No," she whispered. No. He opened his eyes. He saw her. A faint, small smile touched his lips. "Elena," he whispered. He was so cold. "No!" she cried, falling to her knees in the dust and the blood. She grabbed him, pulling his head, his shoulders, into her lap. "No, you cannot, you cannot!" He looked up at her face, streaked with tears and soot. The face he had seen in his teepee, the face he had kissed. The test," he whispered, a small, bloody cough interrupting him. "Did I pass? Oh, God!" she wept, rocking him, holding him tight. No, you are not leaving. You hear me?" She bent her head low, her tears falling on his face, her voice a fierce, desperate whisper, a vow in the face of death. "You swore," she sobbed. "You swore I was yours. You swore it, and I swear it, too. Do you hear me? Grey Wolf, if you dare to go the rest of my life, every day, every breath, it is still yours. You are my husband. You are my heart. You are mine. You cannot go." He looked at her, and his eyes, for a moment, were clear. He saw her, his warrior, his woman. He raised his hand, weak, so weak. His bloody fingers brushed her cheek, leaving a crimson smear, and then his hand fell. His eyes closed, and he lay still in her arms, under the vast, silent, and indifferent Texas moon. The North Canyon was not a place of victory. It was a butcher's yard in the moonlight, a place of death and broken vows. The gunfire had stopped, replaced by the groans of the wounded and the high, thin wail of Elena Whitfield as she held the man she loved. "He is not dead." The voice was like dry leaves. Black Coyote stood over her. His face was streaked with powder and blood, but his eyes were clear. He looked at Grey Wolf, his rival, his ally, now just a bleeding piece of meat in the white woman's lap. "His spirit still fights," Black Coyote said. He knelt, his hand touching the chest of Grey Wolf. "He is weak, but he is here. Stone Woman. We must take him to Stone Woman, now." There was no victory. There was no counting of the dead. There was only the price. The warriors of Black Coyote, now merged with the men of Grey Wolf, worked with a grim, silent efficiency. They gathered their own wounded. They left the dead white men where they lay. They did not scalp them. They did not take their weapons. They just left them, a testament to a war that had benefited no one. A travois was made. Grey Wolf, his body pale and still, his breathing a shallow, wet rasp, was tied to it. Elena refused to leave his side. She rode the long, agonizing journey back to the Comanche camp, her hand never leaving his, her own vows from that night echoing in her mind. "If you go the rest of my life, it is still yours." She would not let him go. Back at Fort Redemption, the scene was one of total, systemic collapse. Lieutenant Harris, his authority confirmed by the arrival of the Comanche war party and the clear evidence of his colonel's treason, had done his duty. Colonel Nathan Beaumont, bound, his ruined hand wrapped in a bloody, makeshift bandage, was thrown into the same jail shed he had once used for drunken natives. He was no longer a man of poise and ambition. He was a cornered, defeated animal, his eyes wide with a hate that had curdled into madness. He did not wait for a trial from Washington. His trial was the silent, accusing stares of his own men as they passed the jail. Agent Thorne, a man of paper, had found himself in a world of blood. He had seen the truth, and it horrified him. His telegraph wires hummed all night, sending messages east. The messages were no longer about truce violations. They were about treason, murder, and a conspiracy so deep he was afraid to name it. When the real authorities arrived 3 days later, it was not with a small escort. A major general, a hard, gray man named Croft, who had fought in the real war back east, arrived with 2 full companies of veteran cavalry. He had been sent to investigate a breakdown in command. He found a full-blown conspiracy. He listened to Agent Thorne's report. He listened to the trembling, guilt-ridden, but honest testimony of Lieutenant Harris. He listened to the quiet, damning words of Corporal Elias Cole, who recounted the first ambush. He stood over the exhumed, hastily buried bodies of Kincaid's men, the ones with the army boots on their feet. He saw the reports from the railroad, the ones Beaumont had hidden, which mentioned payments for security services to a man named Sam Kincaid. General Croft was not a politician. He was a soldier, and he knew a rotten command when he saw one. The lies were too big, too clumsy, too bloody. The truth, in this case, was undeniable. The peace had not been broken by the Comanche. It had been systematically murdered by his own officer. In the Comanche camp, a different kind of war was being fought. It was a war for a single soul. Stone Woman, the sister of the mother of Grey Wolf, was a healer of immense power. She did not use the white man's medicines. She used the earth. The tipi was filled with the smoke of burning sage and sweetgrass, a constant, cleansing cloud. Grey Wolf lay on his robes, his body burning with fever. The wound in his side, inflicted by Kincaid's last, dying shot, was deep, and it was poisoned. For 6 days, he did not wake. He lived in the shadow world, haunted by the ghosts of his wife and son, haunted by Kincaid, haunted by the blood. And Elena did not leave. Stone Woman boiled herbs, poultices of yarrow and wild onion, which she packed into the red, angry wound. She forced a bitter, dark tea between his cracked lips, but she was only healing the body. Elena was healing the man. She sat by his side for 6 days and 6 nights. She did not sleep. She did not eat. She held his hand. She bathed his face with cool water from the river. And she talked. She whispered to him in the dark, her voice the only anchor in his fevered dreams. She told him about her vow in the canyon. She told him he was not a ghost. She told him he was her husband, her heart. She told him, fiercely, that he did not have permission to die. She was the virgin bride, no more. She was a woman claiming her man from the spirits, and she would not be denied. On the 7th day, the fever broke. He woke up. The teepee was quiet. The air was clear. He felt weak, so weak. He felt a sharp, pulling pain in his side. He was alive. He turned his head. She was there. She was not a vision. She was asleep. Her body slumped in a chair Stone Woman had forced her into, her head resting on the edge of his bed, her hand still locked in his. She was thin, her face smudged with soot and exhaustion, her hair a tangled mess. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He squeezed her hand. Her eyes snapped open, green eyes, red from weeping, now wide with a sudden, brilliant, life-affirming hope. "Elena," he whispered. His voice was a dry croak. She did not speak. She just bent her head and pressed her lips to his scarred, chapped hand, and her shoulders shook with a silent, grateful, and final release. The new treaty was not signed at the fort. It was signed in the open air, on the banks of the Red River. Halfway between the Comanche camp and the white man's world, General Croft had insisted. There would be no more symbols made of people. There would be honesty. 10 bears came, his ancient face carved with a wary, fragile hope. And General Croft came, his blue uniform a symbol not of war, but of a new, hard-won law. They rewrote the peace. The lies of Beaumont, when exposed, had forced Washington's hand. The railroad barons, implicated in the Kincaid payments, had backed down, screaming for a scapegoat. Beaumont was that scapegoat, but his fall had cleared the air. The new treaty was simple, and it was honest. The Comanche were not to be moved. The North Canyon, the valley of their winter camp, these were declared permanent Comanche land, not by the grace of the army, but by right. The railroad would be built, yes, but it would go south, around their lands, not through them, and, in the most shocking change, the Comanche would be partners, their warriors, under their own command, would be paid as scouts, as railroad police, to guard their section of the land from outlaws. They were not being made dependents. They were being made partners. Fort Redemption was transformed. The cannons were dismantled. The Gatling guns were shipped back east. The fort, General Croft declared, was no longer a military post. It was a trade depot. The great gates were opened. And for the first time, peace, a real bustling and noisy peace, broke out. Comanche women brought in cured hides and beaded work. They traded with the wives of the soldiers for iron pots and sugar. Elena watched Stone Woman, her face a mask of iron dignity. Trade a perfect buffalo robe for 10 pounds of coffee and a bolt of blue cloth. It was not friendship. Not yet. It was commerce. It was a start. At the public signing, one last piece of honor had to be restored. General Croft had made his speech. 10 bears had made his. Then, a young, nervous corporal named Elias Cole had stepped forward, at the insistence of Lieutenant Harris. He stood before the gathered soldiers and warriors, and he spoke. He did not speak of the last battle. He spoke of the first one, the ambush on the trail. "I was there," Cole stammered, his voice shaking. "When we were hit, the men in paint, my rifle jammed. I was a dead man. One of them had his knife in my throat." He paused, and he looked across the crowd, to where Grey Wolf sat, his arm in a sling, his side tightly bound, but his back straight. Grey Wolf. "He saved me," Cole said, his voice ringing with conviction. "He did not fight with them. He fought for us. He saved me. He saved Lieutenant Harris. He saved her." He pointed to Elena. "He is not just a warrior. He is a man of honor, a better man than some of us." It was done. Grey Wolf was no longer the savage. He was, in the public record, in the eyes of both sides, the man who had fought to save the peace, while the colonel had fought to destroy it. For Elena, the peace was more complicated. To the wives of the officers who remained, she was a pariah, a traitor, the woman who had slept with the enemy and brought shame to her race. They gathered their skirts when she passed. They whispered in the new trade depot, "The Indian woman." But to the common soldiers, like Corporal Cole, she was something else. She was the Lady of the Truth. She was the one who had courage when the officers had none. And to the children she had once taught, she was just Miss Elena. To the Comanche, she was no longer the white snake. She was the woman who speaks. She had stood in the council. She had ridden in the war party. And, most importantly, she had sat the vigil. She had refused to let their warrior die. Stone Woman had publicly given her a new name, a name that meant Heart of the Wolf. She was in the way of the people, herself now. And Black Coyote, the man who had been the most vocal in his hate, he was the most changed. He did not become soft. He became a zealot. He became the first leader of the new railroad police. He and his warriors. They did not love the white man, but they loved their land, and they loved the promise. Black Coyote, his rifle clean, his eyes sharp, became the fiercest guardian of the new treaty. He had seen what treachery looked like, and he now dedicated his life, his famous ferocity, to ensuring that this promise, won with blood, would not be broken. The conflict was over. The external, bloody, loud war was done, and the internal one, the quiet, difficult, and lifelong war, was just beginning. That night, in the teepee, the air was still, the camp was quiet. Grey Wolf was strong enough to sit up, his wound a long, puckered, healing scar that would mark him forever. Elena sat on her own pallet, brushing her hair. They were alone. The silence was no longer the easy, shared silence of their vigil. It was the awkward, charged silence of two people from different planets who now had to build a life. He was her husband. In her heart, she was his woman, in his... But what did that mean? You will be healed soon," Elena said, her voice sounding strange, too loud in the teepee. "Yes," he said. "The treaty is good. The trade is good. It is good," he agreed. The silence returned. He looked at her. She was wearing the buckskin dress, but her hair was brushed in the white woman's way. She was both, and he was both. A warrior of the plains, who was now a partner with the railroad. "My world is gone," he said quietly. This new world of paper and iron, I do not know it. "And my world," she said, putting her brush down, "has cast me out. I do not belong anywhere." "You belong here," he said, his voice soft but firm. "You belong with me." He reached out his hand. "But this is not your world, your God, your houses, your books." She looked at his outstretched hand, the hand that had held hers through the fever, the hand that had killed Kincaid, the hand that had touched her cheek. This was the real question. The virgin bride had been tested, and she had passed. The lonely Comanche had been tested, and he had passed. Now, the real test began. Not of war, but of life. How would they live? Would she teach his children to read from the Bible? Would he teach them to hunt the buffalo? What happened when her God and his Creator looked at each other in the eyes of their children? The conflict was no longer about guns and land. It was about culture, language, and family, and how to build a single life from two broken, scarred, and profoundly different worlds. He was still holding his hand out. She looked at it, and she knew. This was the true choice. Not the one made in fear in Beaumont's office, but the one made in truth, in the smoky dark of a teepee. She took his hand. They had two weddings, for they were two people. The first wedding was held under the open, endless sky, on the prairie grass, as the sun was setting. It was a Comanche wedding. 10 Bears himself, his old, lined face filled with a new, fragile peace, presided. Stone Woman stood for his mother, her hand on Elena's shoulder, a silent, powerful gesture of acceptance. Black Coyote and his warriors sat on their horses in a wide, silent circle, not as a threat, but as witnesses. Their rifles pointed to the sky in salute. There were no spoken vows. Grey Wolf, his side bound but his back straight, simply took a new, painted buffalo robe and draped it over his own shoulders, and then over Elena's. He pulled her under the shared warmth, and they were, in the eyes of the people and the Creator, one. The second wedding was in the small, rough pine chapel at Fort Redemption. It was a strange, quiet, and lonely affair. The disgraced Reverend Hobbs was long gone, shipped back east with Beaumont and Kincaid to face a federal trial. A new, young chaplain, his face pale and nervous, read the words from his book. There were only 3 witnesses. Lieutenant Harris, his uniform neat, his face showing the quiet gravity of a man who had seen his world turned upside down and had chosen the right side. Corporal Ellis Cole, his hands scrubbed clean, standing as her friend, and, in the back pew, her face an unreadable mask of hard respect. Stone Woman. She did not understand the words, but she understood the vow. When the chaplain said, "You may kiss the bride," Grey Wolf, who had stood stiff and awkward in this strange, confining room, looked at Elena. He did not kiss her, not here, not in this house that was not his. He simply took her hand, the one that had held his through the fever, and he held it. It was enough. The 2 ceremonies, one of smoke and one of words, had confirmed the single truth that had been forged in the dark, in the canyon, in the blood. They were, in the eyes of God and the Creator, truly and finally, husband and wife. Elena Whitfield was no more. The name, the woman, the virgin bride, was a ghost, a story. The title itself became a strange piece of fort legend, a dark, humorous tale the veterans told at the depot store. "Remember when the colonel went mad?" they would say. Send the teacher out to test the wolf, and she came back with the wolf at her side, and she put the colonel in irons. The name, once a mark of shame, was now a mark of her power. It was an irony she had come to appreciate. She became Elena Grey Wolf, and she found her true calling. She did not go back east. She did not belong there. She belonged in the space between. She reopened the schoolhouse, but it was not the same schoolhouse. On the benches sat the pale, freckled children of the soldiers. Beside them, their hair long and dark, sat the children of the Comanche. Little Wing, her eyes bright and quick, learned her letters alongside the sergeant's son. Elena was the bridge. She taught them English. She taught them arithmetic. And in the afternoons, when the formal lessons were done, she sat with Stone Woman and she learned the people's words. She learned their stories. She taught a new kind of lesson, one of respect. She was no longer a missionary, imposing her world. She was a translator, helping 2 worlds find the words to speak to one another. Grey Wolf was no longer the lonely warrior. The ghost who had lived for death had been replaced by a man burdened with life. He was still a warrior. He still rode the plains, his eyes to the horizon, his body the map of the land he loved. He hunted, he led his men, but he was, by the facts of the new treaty, a politician. He was a leader. He had to protect his people, not just from bullets, but from paper, from lies, from the sharp, fast-talking men who came west on the new, screaming iron horse. He would come to the schoolhouse. He would stand in the back, this tall, scarred, and formidable man, his arms crossed, his presence filling the small room. He would not sit. He would not learn the white man's letters. His pride was too deep, but he would listen. He would listen, hour after hour, as Elena taught the children, his head tilted, learning the sound of the language. He was learning the shape of their words, the rhythm of their arguments, the music of their deceptions. He was sharpening his mind as he had once sharpened his knife, preparing for the new, long, and word-filled war of peace. When he was called upon to sign the official trade agreement with General Croft, he could not write his name. Elena stood beside him, and he took the pen, a strange, small stick in his powerful hand. He did not make an X as the other warriors did. He looked at her, And then, with a deep, focused care, he drew his sign, a small, simple wolf's head. He had joined her world of paper, but he had done it on his own terms. The West was changing. The sound of the train whistle, once a distant rumor, was now a daily cry, a reminder that the world was shrinking, that the old ways were fading. The great herds of buffalo were thinner. The new settlers, hearing of the safe territory, came in a new flood. It was not a perfect peace. It was, as Grey Wolf had said, a new prison, a new fight. But Redemption Depot, as the fort was now called, was an island. It was a place where, for a while, the fight had been won. It was a living example, a single, flickering candle of hope that two peoples could live, not in perfect harmony, but in a state of hard-won, profitable, and mutually respectful truce. They became symbols of it. Elena kept the tattered, torn piece of her veil, the one the drunken soldier had ripped from her head, the one Grey Wolf had retrieved from the dust. She had washed it, but she had not hidden it. Stone Woman, seeing her holding the small, white scrap, had taken it. She had grunted, a sound of understanding, and had returned it a week later. It was no longer a scrap. The Comanche women had mended it, with sinew and care. They had sewn a border of tiny, bright blue beads around the edge, and in the center, they had tied a single, perfect, red tailhawk feather. It was no longer a symbol of her old, fragile purity. It was a map of her new, scarred, and beautiful strength. And Grey Wolf wore a new necklace. It was a simple thong of leather. On it hung a disc of silver, the size of $1. On one side, a Comanche silversmith had hammered a rough, powerful image of a mountain, the mountain of their ancestors. On the other side, the fort's own blacksmith, a man who respected the warrior, had polished the silver smooth and engraved a second mountain, a mountain from a map, a white man's mountain. The disc hung between them, two worlds, back to back, resting on his heart. One evening, a month after their wedding, a mail rider came. He brought a letter, its edges frayed from a long journey. It was from Fort Laramie. Up north, it was from Charles Avery. Elena took it, her heart giving a small, final, distant flutter of her old life. She opened it by the fire in their teepee. Grey Wolf was across from her, quietly mending a bridle, his hands sure and steady. The letter was not cold. It was, in its way, desperate. He had heard the whole true story of Beaumont's treason, of Kincaid's murders, of her testimony. He wrote, even recognize her. "You are a heroine," he wrote, his handwriting fast and sloppy. "I have misjudged you, so terribly. I'm a fool. I was worried about nothing," he apologized. He begged her forgiveness, and then he offered her salvation. "I am coming," he wrote. "I have secured a discharge. I am coming to Fort Redemption. I will take you away from this. I will rescue you from that ordeal. I will bring you back to civilization, where you belong. We will be married, as we planned. All will be forgiven." Elena read the letter twice. She felt nothing, not anger, not sadness, just a profound, quiet, and final distance. He still did not understand. He never would. He called her a heroine, but he still saw her as a victim to be rescued. He called her life an ordeal. He called his world civilization. She looked up, across the fire, at her husband. He was watching her, his dark eyes quiet, his hands still. He had not asked what the paper said. He was waiting for her. He was trusting her. This was her civilization, this teepee, this man, this hard, true, and shared life. She smiled, a small, real, and private smile, just for him. And then Elena Grey Wolf, the woman who speaks, the heart of the wolf, leaned forward, and she fed the last, thin, paper ghost of her old life into the fire. She watched the words rescue and civilization turn to black ash and float up, disappearing into the smoke. She was, at last, truly and completely free. So the story goes. Down here in the dust and the rock of the West, a story about a test. A virgin bride was sent as a pawn. A test to see if a man was a beast. But she was not the one being tested. The civilization that sent her. The one of high collars and cold letters and polished, murderous ambition that was what was tested. And it was found wanting. And a lonely Comanche, a warrior who thought his heart was a dead, cold stone. A man who lived only for his own ghosts, he found his life. Not in killing his enemies, but in defending, and then loving. One of them. They learned the hard way. What we all learn. Sooner or later, that love, real love, is not a soft word in a parlor. It is not a polite letter. It is a hard, strong, and sometimes dangerous thing. It is respect. It is the courage to see the truth, and to speak it, even if it means turning your back on your own people, on your own world. It is the courage to stand by the one your heart has chosen. In the end, you would see them. Not riding off into the sunset. That is a coward's escape. That is for stories. No, you would see them riding into the future. Grey Wolf on his horse, his back straight, and Elena seated behind him, her arms wrapped tight around his waist. They would be riding the ridge between the worlds. On their left, the two new steel, gleaming lines of the railroad track, the iron of the white man's world, catching the last blood-red light of the setting sun, and on their right, the vast, open, and endless plains, the smoke of the teepee, and the sound of the wind. They were not running from the future. They were not hiding from the past. They were riding, together, into a hard, unknown, and shared tomorrow. The wind, blowing from the west, carried the faint, distant sound of a train whistle, and, mixed with it, the sound of children laughing in the dust. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I truly appreciate you spending your time with me here in the West. I would love to build a community around these tales. So please leave a comment below and let me know where in the world you are listening from. It is always a pleasure to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to the channel, Wild West Tales, and giving this video a like. And if you really loved it, please hit that hype button. It helps tell the algorithm that this is a story worth sharing, and it allows these tales to be heard by more folks. Thank you again. And until the next tale, may your trails be clear.